here. And then, okay, perfect. So before any other thing, thank you guys for coming. Thank you for agreeing to take part in this. Thank you for being on time. I don't know about you guys. This is a first for me. So if someone is anxious or stressed, know that you're not alone. So a few of you guys know each other and some don't know each other. So for equity, everyone, we're going to do a round table, and we're going to start with who? With Bemsi, because you were the first to come online. So just introduce yourself, who you are, what you do, just quickly for everyone on the panel to know who you are, and also for the attendees.
So I'm Bemsi Bum, but everybody calls me by the contraction of my name, Bemsi. I work as a research associate at the University of Cambridge. Is there any?
No, we'll get into more details later.
All right.
So Chris.
I'm the same. Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
I'm Christian Young. Most people know me as Chris. I work as a broker at a physical commodity brokerage. I'm actually meant to be at work today.
We'll make sure your employers don't see this. And where are you? Where do you work?
I work in a company called WLT Trading on the Isle of Wight in the UK.
Okay, perfect. Daniel, you're muted.
Yeah. My name is Daniel Ngongan. I work in marketing, specifically in branding. Specifically in branding and digital media as a digital media branding strategist at the PR and the agency called Image Nation. And I know Chris actually from way back from university. When University of Goa together, we've had a couple of many interactions in clubs and in Defi Municity where I used to live. So yeah, at least that's one person I know personally on the panel.
Okay, perfect. Ben Lawrence.
Hi guys. I am Ben Lawrence Kema. I'm a medical doctor. I am actually in residency training. I'm training to become an obstetrician and a gynecologist in the west of England. I'm currently stationed in the Royal Stoke University Hospital in Stoke-on-Trent. I know Bemsibom. He's a friend and a brother from childhood. And it's very nice to hear about Ndefi, Moliko and all those places, because I obviously went to University of Boya. So very warm feelings and memories. Thank you.
Okay. Sabina, I don't know if you're going to be able to talk, but if you can talk, just say something. I'll count from 1 to 5 if she won't talk. Anyway, I shared the profile of each of the panelists. It wasn't really an in-depth profile. It was just something, a glimpse for everyone to know each other. So during this talk, it's a serious topic we're going to talk about. And if I smile, just know that it's because these people are very dear to me. I know each and every one of them. So I'm introducing myself now. So I'm Juanita. I work in the banking sector in Paris. And yeah, that's about it. I know Bem Sibom and Ben Lawrence from secondary and high school in Boya. Sabina too, she was a petit at BHS Boya. Chris, I met him in the UK. And Daniel, we met on Twitter. So yeah, first of all, the reason why we're having this talk is because for the past 4 years, our country has not been the same again because of the crisis going on in the Northwest and Southwest regions. For the past weeks following the Kumba massacre, we've had a lot of talks on that question, and most of these talks tackled the legal and historical basis of the crisis. And from all of that, we could all infer that the crisis didn't start 4 years ago. The crisis actually started back in 61. And the reason why I felt necessary for people to talk about it, to talk about the Anglophone crisis story, not just limiting themselves to 4 years, what has been happening since 2016, is because the decisions that were made between 61 and even 72, after we changed from being a federation to a united country, La République, several decisions were made, and those decisions had an impact on the lives of people. We were not born when all of those things happened, but we are living the consequences of those decisions. So I felt like it was important for us to make known these issues, and particularly to start the talk with the Francophone brothers, because a lot of people, I was in that situation myself, and I'm sure there's still some things that I don't fully understand. A lot of people do not understand why Anglophones have grievances, why they are so my first question will be, why did you agree to this talk? Why did you feel necessary to take part in this talk? So before everything, like, I have this small jar. I put a few numbers in there. So I'm going to attribute numbers to you guys. So Bemsi will be first. Hold on. Let me write it. Bemsi, number 1. Christian, 2. It's kind of going alphabetically, no. Ben Lawrence, 3. And Daniel, 4. So whatever number I pick, you're going to talk first, so that there's no issue with that. So why did you decide to take part in this? So it's number 3. So that would be Ben.
Hello, everyone. So the reason why I wanted to be part of the chat was very simple. I believe in dialogue. I believe in dialogue, and I believe in the power of education and communication. I believe that, in ignorance, a lot of things can sprout out that are very hard to control. But if we dialogue, if we talk, if we communicate, if we chat, and we educate, then we enrich ourselves. And it's more likely that we find a solution through dialogue than any other means where people are talking and we're not listening to each other. So I thought that a forum where we're listening when we're talking is the best place for us to, as people that have unique experiences, to sort of bring out these experiences, and for us to listen to ourselves, and hopefully for us to sort of disseminate this information beyond this forum, and for other people to start to have an idea of what all of this is really all about. That's it in a nutshell.
Okay, thank you, Ben Lawrence. What I note from what you said is dialogue and solution. So number 2, that will be Christian.
Yeah, thanks, Ronita, for actually getting me on board. I think the reason why I decided to take part in this is I share the same sentiments Ben just voiced out. It's about dialogue. I think perhaps the only way we can have a clearer picture of how to move forward is if we candidly decide to sit with each other and basically share experiences and share our views. The truth of the matter is that when you speak to different people about the same crisis, you find out that people echo polar views. You have people. I'm guessing it's because the consequences are probably different. People have experienced different consequences depending on where they grew up, depending on who they're associated with. So I felt that a forum such as this would be enriching and enlightening if we could all share our views and probably dialogue on how we could find a solution to this mess that we are in now.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, Chris. So Daniel is next. I pick number 4.
Well, for me, it's because of I can feel like there's a wave of empathy, or maybe just concern, that has been really been rising recently. I was just talking with somebody just a couple of hours ago about it. I feel like maybe just the visceral nature of the Kumba attacks has, I don't know what was so particular about it, because these are things that have been happening over and over. And it's not the first time that we've seen this happen. Gamble just in a couple of months ago was one of those things. But just recently, there's been this wave of people just coming together and acknowledging that there's a real problem. And unfortunately, many people have still not understood the problem, because there are still people who are talking about the problem from the end point of the solution, but not, they're trying to find the solution to the problem without tackling the root of the problem. And I feel like it's because a lot of people have still not understood the root of the problem. And if we don't address the root of the problem, then we cannot effectively solve the issue. And so I feel like now that people are more open to the issue at hand, perhaps now is the best time to do everything possible. It's not, we're not perhaps going to have everybody on one side, but the more we can get people on one side of effectively and sincerely tackling the issue, then the best we can really, really move on ahead and solve the problem. So that's why I really want to be here, because I really want to be an additional voice to just really push out the message and say, okay, this is the issue, and this is how we can tackle it from the root, and this is how we can find a lasting solution to the problem. So that's why I'm here.
Okay, thank you. And lastly, Bemsibom.
I think that my motivation for being here is, the same kind of a mixture of what everybody has said, in the sense that first of all, I have a very personal connection to, what has been going on. I've lost members of my family to the crisis. And so I have a stake, a more personal stake, in this conversation. But more than that, I think I was also interested in listening to what other people have to say, because I guess even for us, those of us who consider ourselves Anglophones and who feel that we, have certain things that we want other people to listen to, there is not that much agreement. There's not that made this like there's a plurality of voices in some sense, plurality of opinions, and I think part of me being part of my interest in this conversation is to listen to other people's experiences as well, what their opinions are. And personally, I think I have a decent understanding of the problem, but I'm not very clear about where solutions will come from. And I think that a huge part of my motivation to take part in this conversation is to listen to the other panelists and to have, kind of an idea of what they think the way forward for all of us is, if, there are any ideas about solutions and what people think the way forward is.
Thank you, Bemsi. What I like about what you said is the fact that it's important to listen to each other, even amongst the panelists, because like Christian said, we all have different experiences of, we're all affected differently by the crisis. And that's the purpose of this talk. When I asked you to talk about your Anglophone crisis story, it doesn't necessarily have to be something negative or something that was so grim, because it's important to bring out these differences, because a lot of the people who are openly who talk about who we see very active, talking about this issue, this problem, the talk or the conversation is literally the same. And one could think that all the experiences of Anglophones are that one. There are definitely stories like those ones, but they're different. So it's a spectrum. So it's important to talk about those and see those and make known these differences even amongst Anglophones themselves. So yeah, that's a good thing. So I'll just run through. I asked you guys to think about a particular. I know your lives are rich, and I asked you guys to think about one story or one thing that you wanted to share, and So we'll get to that. But before everything, this is how I'm sort of going to structure the talk. We're going to look back a little bit on, the different things that have been happening, the Kumba crisis, and how you feel about that, and how you reacted to that. And then we're also going to talk about your individual stories. I selected you guys because you guys are different, and we'll come to particularly why Daniel is here. As you could see from his name and from the profile, Daniel is not originally from the Northwest and Southwest. And I think that's a question that I will have later to, who is an Anglophone, what is an Anglophone? We could talk about that. But I wanted you guys, so you guys are different. Bemsi lived, you're originally from the Northwest. You lived all your life in Boya, if I'm not making a mistake. And then you, after high school, you went to Yaoundé to continue your studies, and you worked there. So you will bring us that aspect of being, an Anglophone, what it is to be an Anglophone in Cameroon, the differences you could see between your life in the Northwest, Southwest, and in the center. Ben Lawrence is not quite the same because he did everything. He has always been based in the Southwest. But then because of, due to the nature of his work, in order to get his degree, obviously he had to not tour, it wasn't fun, but he had to he had to visit various places in Cameroon. And I guess with him, we'll be able to see like the various shades of interactions he could have with Francophones, because one thing that disturbs me a bit is when they generalize Francophones and everyone, Cameroon is wide from the north to the south, the Francophone. So, and we're not the same. It's not a bad thing. We're not the same. So generalizing like that can be different, can be difficult for people to understand. So Ben Lawrence hopefully will be able to make us see his experience, as he went through various areas in Cameroon. Christian is an Anglophone from the Southwest, but lived in the Francophone area most of his life, except when he went to university. And like I said before, Daniel is a Francophone, but lived a good portion of his life in the Northwest, Southwest. So that is that. So how did you guys feel about the different, like Ngabo during in February, and then the Kumba massacre? How did you react? How did you feel about that? So I think I'll go back to this system because I see people thinking. So everyone is like, let me not be the first. So this is luck. Ben Lawrence. You're muted, so we can't hear you.
Let me unmute myself. All right, JJ, thank you very much for that question. It's very interesting. Obviously, I had a completely different approach to most people that I saw online. I saw that there was a lot of outrage. People were really, really angry with the Kumba massacre. The Ngabo was really interesting because I don't think a lot of people heard about it. So it was mostly the Kumba. But for me, I didn't have the same outrage directed towards the same things. As in, I was not really outraged. I was outraged by the incident itself. But I felt like people's reactions were almost 4 years too late, or I would say 3 years too late. I mean, I'd spent the better half of the past 4 years writing about these things. And now that I see Daniel, actually, I think that we've had a few run-ins on Instagram about this sort of conversations. So for me, I thought we had to be talking about these things for a long time, and we didn't talk about them. And we sort of let this happen in the sense that if people paid more attention and listened to the other stories that have happened, and I know a lot of them, Bemsin's dad is one of those stories, but also I know people that have died from this struggle, So a lot of things have happened, and people, I sort of felt, maybe rightly so or wrongly so, that people ignored a lot of these things. And this was this was something that was waiting to happen. And the reason is we did not talk about it. we're waiting for one big massacre. And then when it happened, I felt like people, still took this opportunity to point fingers. We're not addressing the root cause. It's really, really sad. And it sort of feels uncomfortable to talk about the root cause when this sort of massive tragedies happened. But I felt like people waited for this to happen. We did not talk about it nearly enough. And also people took this opportunity to play cheap politics, and it was about who did this, who did that, but we not really asked the question about why did this happen and how do you stop this from happening in the future. So I did not, for example, post, I did on Twitter because I was fighting some sort of Twitter feud, but I did not post the End Anglophone Crisis hashtag. And the reason I didn't do it because I thought there was a lot of hypocrisy around sitting quiet for that long and then waiting for something to happen and then speaking about it. Obviously, I have very strong views about that. But that was sort of my, thought process around everything that happened.
Okay, thank you. If you guys want to, say something, react to what he said, you feel free to do that. The next person is Sibom.
Oh, okay. What I felt was a mixture of, I think it was mostly despair, especially when when you go on social media and then you see that children who are 10, 11 years old, were gruesomely killed. And I felt a lot of despair because there's a lot of conversation that's going on, right? But it feels like, and I think it's a good thing. It's a good thing that we're talking to each other. It's a good thing that we're talking to each other as Anglophones. We're trying to talk to each other as Cameroonians. But it feels to me in some sense that a lot of that conversation is just speaking into the void, because there've been many strains of thought as to what we want out of the Anglophone crisis or what people envision as the end goal. Part of it is they want to raise awareness. This was strain of thought which is saying you want to raise awareness so that maybe we would have, I don't know, maybe some foreign powers are going to intervene, they're going to listen to our cry and they're going to intervene. And that's been going on for 4 years. And evidently nobody's listening to it. Or well, maybe people are listening to it, but nobody's doing anything about it. And things like this have kept happening. People have been dying. People have been, they've been traumatized, by the government, by people who are fighting for them, who are supposedly fighting for them anyways. And there's a lot of outrage, there's a lot of talking, but it feels to me like you're just speaking in the void. And so my first reaction in that case was just despair, really. Like, what's the point of all of this, right? What's the point of going on social media, for example, and condemning these acts? Like, we all condemn them, but who are we talking to? And who is we're dealing with a government that doesn't seem to be listening at all. Or maybe they're listening, but they're not responding at all. And so, I mean, I think that's the big thing that I really feel. There's a sadness that comes with it, but it's more a despair because personally, I do not see, I just don't see any way in which we're going to come out of this anytime soon.
It's very interesting. Ben Lawrence and you used two different words. You spoke about despair, sadness, and Ben Lawrence, we could say you used the words hypocrisy from people, using the hashtag. And although I feel they're two different spectrums, but it's almost the same, because from what I gather from what you guys have said, it's like you have a feeling that with all of the outcry and all of the talk, nothing is going to change. First of all, we're coming 4 years too late, and then now we're still doing talk. We're just talking. We're waiting on higher powers, or I don't know, to do something.
I don't share the sentiment about. I don't share Ben Lawrence's sentiment about 4 years too late, because I think that a huge part of this conversation has been going on for 4 years. to be fair, there's a lot more outrage now, and that many people are adding their voices to the conversation now. But I think that there's been some conversation going on. People have been talking about it. People have been thinking about what we can do about it. And there's been, I think that this one was just a big. It was those gruesome. There's a very visceral reaction to it because, first of all, there were children, and the way in which they were killed, and I think that just provoked a stronger reaction than what had been happening in the past 3 years. But I don't have the same. I don't think that people are being hypocritical for talking about for feeling the way they feel now, or for talking about it now. I don't have that feeling. But what I feel is more a despair, because unless you're talking to somebody who has power to change the situation in some sense, or that the end goal of this conversation would be, for example, that I don't know, our leaders would listen to us and there will be some real movement for change. Emoting on social media for me just seems like then we do it, and then the next massacre happens, and then we do it again, and then it's just there's a pointlessness to it, really, that that's how I feel about it. Yeah.
Okay, so before we continue, allow Chris to share his opinion.
Yeah, it's just as you mentioned, it's interesting listening to the views of both Ben Lawrence and Ben C. As far as I'm concerned, I think, Ranita, just to correct you as well, my parents now actually live in Kumba, so it hit very close to home when the massacre happened. But again, it doesn't really matter where it happened, isn't it? It was gruesome, and it's something that should not be going on. I mean, these are things that we used to watch on international news back in the day when we were kids, and it always felt like, it would never ever happen in our backyard. And see where we are today. I share what Bemsi is saying. I mean, it's nice for us to talk about things like this, to share our views and everything. But the thing is, what's the end point? To what end? Who's listening to us? We're talking among ourselves, but how much power do we really have to change anything? It's good that amongst ourselves we try to make the picture a bit clearer, or probably try to understand what each person feels and where they're coming from. But the people that have a stake in probably making things better are not coming to the table. And I think that's the frustrating thing, because you see these things happening time and time again. I mean, Daniel spoke about Ngabo a couple of months ago, but I mean, there's been massacres for the last 4 years, almost every week. Some of them are less publicized than others. I don't know why, but this has been happening for the last 4 years. I think perhaps the reason why the hashtag and there's more outcry now is probably because this is coming on the back of the NSAS, the NSAS protest, which was quite global and everything. It trended. It was trending in so many countries. International people voiced about it. It was on international news, and then when the Kumba thing happened, I think the sentiments were already quite high. And then people decided to speak about it. I don't think there's anything wrong. I don't think we could say that it's coming 4 years too late, because, it's not as though it's not helping. It is helping. People are more aware about this. I think a few, should I say, people with more power in terms of their voice. We've had some international athletes tweet about it. I'm guessing probably the UN or whichever body would be able to throw in some light or probably shine a torch on the issues. But the thing is, just as Bemsi said, what are we doing? Because we are talking about it now and it's fine. This is a very, very brilliant idea, Ronita, don't get me wrong. But the thing is, I feel the people that should really come to the table, the people that be having this conversation, should be listening to us, are unfortunately not paying any time or any attention to it. And it's just frustrating, because you look at this and you're saying to yourself, it's going to happen again.
When you say the people who should, like, who are the people? The government?
I'm talking about, well, I'm guessing at some point we're going to get to the root of it, isn't it? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
There's two sides fighting, predominantly two sides fighting. Okay. We have the Cameroonian government, and then we have the secessionist army. So neither of them are talking to each other, I'm guessing. Neither of them are listening to what the youth have to say. Or if they are, at least they're not making it known, and they're not responding. So it sort of feels like, just as Bemsi said, we are talking, but, we're talking to ourselves. We're just saying stuff and then it's echoing back to us.
You said because you said like the right people, the people who have a stake at this, and then you mentioned after the people who are fighting and the government. Don't you think, like, when we say we've been talking to the wrong people, we've had, yes, sportsmen talk about this, but isn't it like, what did we do? Like, what are we doing ourselves? Because although you have these main people, but at the end of the day, we are the ones who are living the consequences of those discussions. And when you think about it, when you think about the history, when the two territories came to unite, you had the peoples, and then you had selected people who went and did talks, and we don't know what happened there, and we don't know what they spoke about and what they agreed on, and we're living the consequences of these things. So evidently we have a stake at this, and we also have to, if we don't want the story to repeat itself, because even if these people talk and then they have the ceasefire, who knows what they're going to agree with, because men, capital M, remain men, people remain people. So what are we going to do? Because first of all, we don't want to leave the consequences of their actions, because 61, and also even this crisis going on, we're not the ones who decided that. The people living in Kumba, Boya, Limbe, they didn't decide to go to fight and all of that, but they're living the consequences of those decisions. What are we doing? So have we been talking? Have we been talking together? Have we been talking to each other?
Don't get me wrong. Obviously, we all have a stake in peace. I would like to believe that there's no one who's of sane mind that would, be given the choice between peace and war, and would, for whatever reason, choose war. We all have a stake in peace. What I meant by we are not talking to the right people is, obviously, I feel that this panel is incomplete, isn't it, without someone from the government listening to our views, or someone from the what's the name of the Amazonia Restoration Forces listening to our views as well, because we are talking as people who are experiencing the consequences of what's happening, and our experiences may be different, but its consequences all the same. And I feel like the government and the Amazonian forces should be willing to come to the table, or at least have a representative seat here, because without that, then it feels like it's an incomplete picture. There's a missing piece to the puzzle. And whatever we say here, I don't think would necessarily advance or make things any better, if I'm making myself clear.
Okay.
Just a quick one, JJ.
Yeah.
I just wanted to say, Chris, so when I talked about going back to 2016, what I meant was, so this panel, my understanding of this panel is, it's not about the government. This is my understanding. So I sort of disagree with you there. So this panel was very relevant because the government leads, but the people leave. So I thought that for us, this panel, the aim for this panel was for us to, go across the border, across the Mongo, back and forth, and have a conversation with the people that live these lives, and the people that interact, and the people that have failed to listen. And so when we go back to 2016, what I meant was, so there was a video that was circulating in the north of Cameroon where there was some soldiers that shot some women carrying children in their backs. I wanted outrage when that happened. I thought it was 2014, 2016, somewhere around that time. I wanted outrage from there. And those are not Anglophones, those were Cameroonians. I wanted people to be outraged by it. I wanted our voices to never be quenched. That's what I wanted. And for Gabu and for everyone that has died, for Bemsim's dad and people that, young boys that are walking on the streets, and for the soldiers that died as well, I wanted people to never stop saying that, okay, where is this coming from? Why do we hate ourselves? Or what is the ambiguity in terms of who we are as Cameroonians? That's what I meant by, if there was a concerted effort, people didn't just sit back and waited for the government, then maybe something would have happened. Maybe not. But I feel like we should not just push away the responsibility. I understand that power speaks to power, and it's a very important principle that I understand. But for us as the people, there is a responsibility. And Leonardo Gramsci speaks about what the populace has to do, especially when the government is failing. We've seen that there's a lot of things that happen. We complain about bad governance, but the same government is still there. Who sustains the government? That is the power of the people. And the conversation needs to happen between the people. I need to speak across the border for someone to listen to my Anglophone story. And you need to tell me what your Francophone story is and what your Cameroonian story is. That's what I meant by my disappointment with what people have done. And it cannot be a knee-jerk thing. It cannot be back of NSAS or back of anything. It needs to be, it's our daily story, and it needs to be relevant at each point in time, independent of Nigeria's story or anyone else's story. That was the point I was making.
Okay. So Daniel, we're going to allow you to talk.
Well, for me, as far as the reaction to Kumba or the massacre was concerned, honestly, it can be seen from two perspectives actually. My individual response was very different from my digital response. Like if anybody can go scroll back to my Twitter feed in that period, they would probably see somebody who was outraged and who just wanted justice and who was tired of the whole thing, and was very vocal about it, especially. But in real life, honestly, when the news came on my Twitter, my WhatsApp class group, I was a lot calmer about it. And not calm because I didn't feel concerned, but just because I think at some point, like many people have become a little bit anesthetized to the whole thing, to sometimes the gruesome images that we see. And I remember one particular incident, I think it was last year, or I can't remember. A classmate of mine posted about 3 pictures of some corpses, that were discovered in Bamenda or something, or somebody who had been shot. I cannot remember exactly, but it had to do with the Anglophone crisis. And I remember at that particular point in time, we were discussing football, the English Premier League, in the class group. And just there in the middle of our conversation, somebody sent those pictures with a caption explaining what happened. And there were about 15 people discussing at that particular point in time. And nobody out of the 15 people that were discussing football stopped for a moment to discuss those pictures, which was a completely different reaction from what would have happened, what used to happen back in 2017 and early 2017 and 2016 when this crisis started. So I think it's also because I've gone through a number of phases which have led through a number of breaking points. And over time, I've had a number of breaking points. The very first breaking point, and I came back to it and actually spoke about it on Twitter, was when I was trying to talk about my Anglophone crisis story. I mentioned the fact that on December 4th, 2016, there was this boy, I think he was 22 years old at the time, Akun Julius, who was shot in Bamenda, and his body was being carried on a large piece of plank and was just taken around Bamenda, and people were videoing and stuff. And that day, I saw that video and I cried. That was the very first breaking point for me. There was another video of a man who's had to bury his 4 children who were shot at the farm. On October 1st, 2017, we all know what happened that day. We all saw the reports on TV and we all saw the pictures and the images. That was another breaking point for me. So all of these successive breaking points, unfortunately, have somehow reduced the shock value for me. I'm still outraged. I'm tired. I really want an end to the whole thing, but you get through all of these stages and realize that at a certain point, you don't even feel that knee-jerk reaction, to borrow Lawrence's word, that you would feel when such a thing happened, the kind of outrage and everything. And I'm thinking about it, I'm like, if for me, who is sitting comfortably in Yaoundé. And I can be that, I can distance myself from just the cruelty of that imagery. What about people who are out there, like the Amber Boys and the soldiers and everything? Like, we all saw the videos of the young girl who was accused in Amanda of sleeping with the police officer who was shot in the street, Florence Ayafo, the other lady in Muyoka who was hacked to pieces, whose head was chopped. Like, so these guys who actually see this thing like live and do it live, like what happens? So I was very scared. For me, maybe it was just the fright that made me uh, take the thing in a more calm way, like we have reached this level. And the funny thing is that this is not the first time I've reached this level. We crossed that a long time ago. Like I think the very first shocking thing was that image of the soldier who was cutting off this Sam Sawyer's head in Kumbo. So every day, every time, every day, every time, every day, every time, we see these things. And it's funny because it's I realized after a very long time, and I probably understand where Benares is coming from, asking why now. Because I realized for a very long time there was a part of the population that was shielded from this whole thing. Even my sister in Canada is not aware because she's not a heavy WhatsApp user. She's not, apart from maybe from Instagram, she doesn't really use social media like that. So she's not even aware. And even here in Cameroon, we have people who are not even aware, not because they don't want to be aware, but just because they live in a certain circle of, in a certain bubble of just not understanding the issue and not having people around them relay these issues to them, either if it's digitally or not. Or sometimes the media that they are exposed to shows it in a different way. And so somebody was asking Madam Rebecca, I mentioned the other day, that why do you keep, aren't you tired of trying to explain this thing to people every time and then they don't understand? I came to realize that we cannot, as much as we're tired of it, and as much as we want to stop explaining to people because, you should know these things by now, you should understand what's happening by now. I realized that there's just a couple of people who don't even get the issue, who don't still today understand the issue. And part of the reason why they were not talking about it or reacting to it in the way that we would have wanted them to react right from day one is just because they were alienated from the issue by forces that they either controlled or did not control. And I have more empathy or more sympathy towards the people that for them it was involuntary. But there are also a couple of people that we know, that we interact with, sometimes throw insults and shade at on social media, who actually understand the issue, who know everything that is about the issue, but don't want to participate in solving it because they feel like perhaps uh, maybe it's going to pull down the power structure that has come out of this whole issue. Because remember, I'm going to quote one of the characters from Game of Thrones who said, chaos is a ladder. And we have seen how people have been able to climb up different forms of ladders throughout the whole chaos that has ensued in the Northwest and the Southwest, either politically or financially or maybe even socially. I don't know. So one of the things, and Ben Lawrence said something very interesting, which was the shooting in the north. That shooting happened, I think, was 2014, but it was 2016, and BBC did a whole investigation about it and really brought out the whole issue. And when it happened, people were talking, and a lot of people were saying, "No, it cannot be Cameroon." And sometimes some people said that who said it was not Cameroon were not even people who actually had like a critical view of the whole thing, who tried to analyze it critically, who tried to investigate on their own. But it's just because some leading figures or some what's the word? Some I'm trying to find the word. I cannot get it. But some thought leaders, some opinion leaders said that no, it's not Cameroon, or the army doesn't behave this way. They just naturally feel like it doesn't, and you can blame a lot of things on it: education, lack of the push for critical thinking in the education system, all of these things that lead people to understand this. So sometimes it's just because people are just acting as a result of the consequences of the way the environment has shaped them, rather than as a result of their own subjective reaction to a particular issue. So uh, that thing happened in Zelevet, and people were refusing. But you had to take the BBC to disprove everybody for the government to accept that, okay, yeah, it happened. And these are the soldiers, who were there. But and even then, people still ask, like, but what did those people do? What did the women do? Why were they even arrested in the first place? Because they've been collaborating. Now, we live in a country where there are rules, there are laws and everything. So even if these people were collaborating with Boko Haram or whatnot, are they supposed to be summarily executed? That's the issue. But everybody knows that. I mean, everybody who was in support of what the Minister of Communication was saying at that particular point in time, that it was in Mali or whatnot, they choose to ignore the law and say, but these people did something, or they must have done something for that treatment to be meted out upon them. So you already understand that somewhere as Cameroonians, we are formatted in a way to always push aside uh, the government. Let me just go straight to the facts. The government, because most of these cases, I mean, if we have to go back to this root of the problem, I'm sure we're going to come to that, but we're going to see the government's own responsibility in the whole issue. So there is this, I don't know, this protection, this urge, this feeling to always protect the sovereignty of the government and putting the government aside from blame, like just basically throwing anointing oil and sanctifying the government from anything that the government could have possibly done in a crisis. And just to say that, okay, you know what, if this thing happened to these people, then they necessarily merited it. I'm only just going to end with a very short and interesting story. Today I was coming here to work, and I took a bike. And the bike rider told me a very interesting story. He said, comme tu vas comme ça, la vie, si vraiment, tu peux être très chanceux. I'm like, what's happened? Sorry, my battery is a little bit down. Okay. So I asked him what happened. And he told me that, well, there is this group, this Jangi group that he goes to play football with. And today he didn't feel like going to play football, but he went to the field, and the guys at the field, actually they were playing football, and then they kicked the ball and it fell on the commandant's house. And the commandant was angry, took the ball and burst it, and he didn't know it was the commandant of the police. And they started insulting this guy that why would you burst that ball, and there was this stuff. And then apparently the commandant called some guys in the police station, came, rounded them up, and took about 11 of them to the police station. They're in the police station right now. And the way the bike driver was narrating to me was like, he was just lighthearted. Like he was lucky not to have gone to the field. But he didn't think about the fact that this is actually abuse of power. Like you can't arrest people for kicking the ball on your house, you know? So that's it. That's Cameroon. And so sometimes this is one of the issues too that we have to look at, that people are just, I don't know, we are just lost somewhere where when we're supposed to have outrage, we don't even have the outrage anymore. So that maybe that's also where my own reaction to Kumba came from.
Yeah. What I like about what everyone said is I'm going to talk about it's true that the talk is about you guys, but I saw my reaction was a blend of all of you guys' reactions, because when you watch and you study what happens on social media and just the news cycle, even on TV, you know that it starts and then it has to drop. So when the End Anglophone Crisis hashtag started, I could already see where it will end, because when you think about it, we started off, we piggybacked on NSAS, and then on Twitter, it took off for like 2 or 3 days. And then on that Saturday when Kumba happened, it was already starting to die down. And then the massacre just ignited it again, and then it took off for another week. And I share with you the fact that it's quite sad that it has to take such things for people to react. It's sad, it's the truth. And I think we also have to accept the fact that that is how life is. Even when we see crises in other countries, there are massacres everywhere in other countries, and even us, it's only when you have these poignant images that you're like, oh, wow, this cannot be happening. It's sad, but it sort of has to happen. And what I want, like, when Kumba happened, I was sad, because what saddened me, it was just the fact of lives lost, because I have respect for life, because when you see people dead, you see a body in it like that, I'm like, all this person needs is, breath of life, and it's not given. So I was just hurt by that. And then the fact that they were just children. And I look back, my analogy was, okay, right. These children here, you have kids that are 10 years old. The crisis started, it blew up in 2016. They were what, 6? They had nothing to do with it. Like nothing, literally nothing. They were just there. So that was what hurt me. But then, like you guys, I was sort of numb, because I remember in 2017, we always, we received all sorts of images and videos on our phones of skulls being opened, all deadly things. And from
I think JJ's gone off there, hasn't she?
okay, sorry, my mom was calling me. I need to put I will put my, sorry. So we're sort of numb on all these images and pictures. So I'm afraid, like, what worries me and scares me a little is that we're getting so used to this, and it's kind of dehumanizing us. So, and that is why we need to do something, because I was active on the hashtag because I believe that communication is important. We think because it hits close to home, because it's a matter that affects us directly, that is why we're aware of these things. But a lot of people don't know. You spoke about your sister in Canada. I remember when Gabo happened, on my Instagram, I posted pray for Gabo, and then a Cameroonian who I know here, who is not like she doesn't even go back to Cameroon. She goes back to Cameroon, but she was like, what happened? I was serious. I almost got mad at her. I'm like, I see you posting. It was the period where there was, I think, pray for Sudan, the whole image. I was like, you're here posting every day about other things affecting other people. You don't know what is happening in your country. And it's sad, but we have to also accept and deal with the fact that a lot of people don't know. That is why everyone is working so hard on his own communication, because as simple as it can be, as simple as just a message can be, it can just spread fake news, and it instills that into people's minds. So, for example, when all of this started, they put everything on the Amber Boys and all of these, and forgetting about the legitimate despair or complaints of, like, the lawyers and all those people who did nothing wrong. They push that aside, and everyone, in most people's minds, they've just instilled that, these are people who want to bring down the country and all of that. So people who could even empathize with the issue just generalize and see all these people as people who want to bring down the country and all of that. So it's important also, as much as it can annoy us, the fact that people are not paying attention, people don't listen, people don't seek to have the correct information. We have to fight that with information. We have to fight that, we have to, in a never-ending or never-ceasing kind of way, repeat the same thing over and over until they get it. Although it makes no sense, although it can annoy us, but we have to do it. I say this because I remember when I thought of this talk, and then I was thinking about who to get on board. The person that I had in mind was Belores, because I remember back in 2016, 2017, we have a WhatsApp group with our batch, and we're talking about this thing, and I remember Ben felt strongly about it, and I was like, I was among one of those people who were like, why are you talking about an Anglophone crisis? There's no, I know you guys, there are difficulties, hospitals and all of this, but it's the same thing in Cameroon. And mind you, I knew about, the whole evolution from the 2 territories to being a united country. But then I knew that, but then I still had that first thought of, it affects us all. We are victims of this governance. We're all victims of this governance. So I'm not, I don't think highly of myself to think that, okay, I'm the most intelligent or whatever. But if I, who had that information, the education on, the uniting of both territories, could not see directly the difference, and I had to have conversations, tough and strong, because I'm also persistent. Other people don't like arguments. So, how much more of these people who don't know, who are not necessarily interested, who will not be persistent, how much more of them, they won't know. So that's why, we need to continue with this communication. It's a good thing, in my opinion. So I've spoken a lot. The next thing is, so the like we said in the beginning, the crisis blew up in 2016, but then the roots of this problem lie, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe it all stems from what happened in Fumban in 61. The basis, or the wedding between the two territories, was not correctly done. And from that, you have a lot of grievances that stem from, the fact that there's no equality, because, there's this whole integration, assimilation, and all of that. And the fact that Anglophones feel like there's no equality between them and the brothers that with whom they unified. And that is the purpose of your Anglophone story. So to say, okay, you as an Anglophone, because your Anglophone story is just your life as an Anglophone in Cameroon. So how has that been like? Can you tell us, can you talk to us about that? If you feel like you had, you were discriminated upon, or you face particular difficulties because you are an Anglophone. I know there's a fine line between normal discrimination, because there are a lot of people who are discriminated upon in Cameroon, just, because we're so diverse. But then I trust you to be able to say also, it's quite subjective, I know, but what was your experience, and how you feel like you had that experience because you are an Anglophone. So I'm going back to my yes. Okay, I picked number 4, but I don't want Daniel to. I'm biased. I don't want Daniel to go first.
Oh, let me go first.
Okay, because it's because it's because I wanted us to do you guys, how do you feel about, because it's an Anglophone crisis talk, and it's my Anglophone crisis story, and a lot of talk has been about, you need to let the Anglophones talk. And I brought in Daniel because although he's branded Francophone, he lived in, Limbe, Tombel, and, in the Northwest, Southwest. So before you talk, I want to have, how do you guys feel about him having a voice or a say in this thing? Not from the stance of being an Anglo. Okay, let me just allow you guys to talk. So yeah. Who wants? You can go as you wish.
I think just as we mentioned, the question presents itself. I mean, when you say Anglophone, who is an Anglophone and who's a Francophone? It's an interesting one, particularly for me. I think I'm probably slightly like Danny, but on the opposite side of it. Most of my early education was done in French, uniquely in French, before eventually integrating myself into bilingual education. Basically meaning that I probably learned how to speak French before I could master the English language. But I still then I was an Anglophone. So it's not really about the language, is it? If I'm sitting somewhere and I speak perfect French in Douala or perfect French in Yaoundé, and someone were to call my name, even after listening to me speak French, I will be termed an Anglophone. They wouldn't think about whether or not I could speak English, my name and where I come from would basically tell them that I'm an Anglophone. So I think in Cameroon, more often than not, people tend to think that Anglophones are people from the northwest or the southwest province, irrespective of, you know, your proficiency in terms of languages. Um, for Daniel, I'm curious to hear what you'd have to say. What do you consider yourself? I consider you an Anglophone. Um, you know, because I was surprised when I actually heard that you were not from the northwest or the southwest. I consider you an Anglophone. It just so happens that, you know, your parents are from the West Province, and that's the way that I view it. But I'm curious to see or hear what the other people say.
Daniel.
Yeah.
Well, Daniel was supposed to say something, right?
Okay. Now just waiting for you guys to give your own input, but I can actually
But if you
talk
if you
about.
no, if Bemsi, you can, and you can also, like, you know, how do you feel about, you know, Daniel being involved in this conversation, and yeah.
Oh no, I mean, I don't have strong feelings against it. I mean, I don't know Daniel personally, but from hearing him talk, if I just met him on the street, I would never have thought. I mean, from his name, I'd know maybe he's from the West, but I wouldn't. It's just the same way I wouldn't particularly consider you as not being Anglophone. You know, I
For
think
me,
that it's more. Yeah, yes, you, Janita. I don't think it's a question of. There's a language element to it, and there's a blood and soil element to it, right? There's a tribal element to it. There's a connection to a particular location. But I think that the way I think about it is that it's more of a cultural element, really. That what's different, it's more of a culture. It's true that it's underpinned by language and connections to particular places, connections to certain tribal ties and things like that. But I think that functionally, when we're talking about Anglophones, we're talking about a specific culture, a way of looking at the world, a way of acting in the world that is different from what we would consider Francophone. So it doesn't really matter to me that somebody's from a different region, or that I have no problem with him having an opinion about it.
so Ben Lawrence.
Quite interesting, because Bemsi and I have had these conversations like a billion times. So the blanket of it is the culture, and then that is underpinned by tribal alliances and things of that sort. So I completely agree. Daniel, to me, it's bang on, you're an Anglophone. And Anglophone is I wanted to first of all start by saying that these appellations are most unfortunate, isn't it? That we're calling ourselves
Very true.
more inherent to ourselves. But this is where we find ourselves, and there's nothing we can do about it. But for me, as Bamsi said, it's a very fluid definition. It's not set in stone. But the most important thing is it's the culture. It's how you look at the world, how you look at it. And we can agree, and if you've gone back and forth with the Bongo, you can see that it is quite distinct. Your worldview, your approach to governance, your approach to your leaders, your approach to society, even your neighbors, that is abundantly obvious that it's not the same. And for me, that is the definition. But I want to say something again, as Bamsi said, there's a blood and soil element there, because I find that when we have these conversations, people that are, Anglophone, who are originally of Francophone origin, that become sort of adopted Anglophones, what happens is that there's always some allegiance. That's what in my sort of dealings and having this debate, what I found is that irrespective of of what culture you've come to grow with. For example, if someone was Anglophone or Francophone and grew up in Kumba all their lives, when we have these debates, there's some sort of allegiance to that fact that, oh, well, I'm from Douala. Even though they understand the ways of life, and the Anglophones have become their brothers and, everything that they know. But there's always that allegiance. So the blanket obviously is a culture, and language is a big part of culture. Religion is another part of culture. Tradition is a part of culture. But then it's underpinned by tribes, isn't it? So Northwest and Southwest are distinct when we have this debate, because what unifies you is a language, but then your name tells you whether or not you're from the Southwest and the Northwest. In that case, we're not talking about Anglophones, we're just talking about Northwest and Southwest as different entities. But Anglophone is one thing that is united by the culture, and a big part of that culture is the language.
So, Daniel, you have the floor.
Yeah, first of all, it's interesting what you said about 1961 and everything. I just feel like I think that I don't want to go back on the history because that's not the topic of today, but it's more of bad governance problem rather than just the historical and political context of the problem since 1961, 72, 82, and so now. So it's really the bad governance and just the trickery in the whole thing that has put us here today more than just the problem. And a lot of times these labels of Anglophone and Francophone have come up, and unfortunately, people have taken it to widen the gap of division. Because if sometimes you see news reports from news outlets of Western media, and they say Cameroon is in the problem because of a problem of language, but it's not a problem of language. It's a problem of, of bad governance. And with the Anglophones, it's different because it's bad governance that is specific to a particular region of the country that had a different status in the 60s and the 50s before it merged with East Cameroon to become a different nation. So today we'll find people always trying to dilute the problem, and I really, really hate that. That vous chamaillez sur une histoire de langue. It's not just it's not a problem of language. There's a historical context to the whole thing. That's what I'm always trying to bring. But to come back to the question, as far as it goes, I'm going to just give three stories, right? Three interventions, three anecdotes. The very first one for me happened about 12 years ago or so. I did my ID card in Bamenda, in Bambili. So I had a receipt 3 months later. Back then, when you could get your ID cards 3 months later, not like today, I went back to Bambili to get my ID card. And on the way back to Yaoundé, I got into Yaoundé. For anybody who knows Yaoundé very well, there's a quartier called Melen around CHU. So passing through Melen, I was sitting in the guarantee bus. It was a small coaster, this 30, 40-seater coaster. And I was sitting by the door, and then it was hot. So I opened the door of the coaster, and there's this young guy. I will never forget. I've never forgotten. He was selling mandarin, and he saw me sitting by the door of the coaster with the door open. There was a little traffic, so the car was moving slowly. And then he said, "Oh, ferme la porte là-bas, Bamenda." That was the very first thing. And I remember feeling very, 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 very hurt. And funny enough, I tried to remember a couple of times when this particular label had come up to insult just basically anybody was Anglophone, because they used to bunch all Anglophones to say vous les Bamenda. So that was the very first time I felt that sting, which was ironical because I'm not, from the Northwest or the Southwest. But just by virtue of having stayed in the school for 7 years in the Northwest with people who were originally from there, I got to understand a lot of things about these people because I'd heard these things before, which is funny because a huge part of my family, my grandfather actually migrated into the Southwest province, was living in Tombe. He got married to a Sawa woman, and my mom and her whole family were just learning English. They grew up in the English system and everything in the Southwest. Before my mom moved to Douala and learned some French, and then she met my dad, who grew up in Bangante and Douala. And they got married, and and they had me and all that. Then that was really interesting because I remember my mom too had said that kind of insult. She had mentioned she had used Bamenda derogatively. So when that guy insulted me that way, I had a mixed reaction because first of all, I'm going to be honest about it, I was ashamed, right? Just based off of the stories of my mom saying some small things, how Bamenda people, primitive. So I was ashamed that somebody felt that I was that person because I was coming in the bus that was obviously coming from Bamenda, and being put in that position. And secondly, I thought about all my friends in school and some of the clashes. You know, there was some subtle clashes I used to have with my classmates about the Northwest people were just like a block, and then Yaoundé and Douala people. It was not even Boya people, no, just Yaoundé and Douala people, because sometimes we used to sit in the dormitory and interact in French, you know, and there was some latent hatred for the fact that we were speaking French, because sometimes they feel French and we didn't feel the French. So it was all of these things that just came together. So I had a very mixed reaction to the whole thing. Then secondly, at the start of the Anglophone crisis, we had an argument with the group, the class group, my class WhatsApp group, and I wasn't very d'accord with the strategy of the ghost towns, because I felt like sooner or later I was going to, I'll ask how long they intended to use as a strategy and how long it was going to go on, you know. And one of my friends told me that he doesn't even know I'm discussing this issue because I'm francophone, and this doesn't even concern me. And he called me a frog, which is a derogative name from francophone for those who lived in Bamenda in particular, because that's where that term really is really used. So my feeling at that particular point in time was that I felt alienated completely. Like I felt terrible, because these are people that I've known for, I don't know, since from when, like for more than 15 years. And we have never had this kind of problem before about this issue. Maybe apart from the little squabbles I've had in secondary school, but which was not even deep. But this was like the really deep thing happening, and people were dying. All of these things were happening, and there was a real serious political arguments going on in the class group. And then this guy said that I shouldn't know how to speak because I'm francophone. And until then, I've never really given myself this notion of anglophone or francophone, because a lot of the times, even in university, I used to meet francophone girls who got into university through the francophone system, and then they had to study in Boya. So they had to do the 3 months course. You guys remember that you have to do before you get into university. So one of the first in class actually, Anita, one of my classmates, was the very first person I got to speak with. So I entered the class, the very first class in UB, and I was speaking with Anita in French the whole time. So we spoke, took down notes. As I was going, my classmate was sitting behind me, and one of them spoke to me in pidgin, like, "Hey, boy, you can't go." I'm like, "Yeah, Maricam." Then Anita looked at me, "Gars, tu es anglophone?" I said, "Yeah." She said, "Mais tu parles bien français?" I said, "Yeah, I grew up in Douala, so that's why I speak French very well." So, she was like, she was shocked. So for me, that concept of Anglophone, for me, I just felt like because it was my first language, so that's what defined me. So that was the second thing. And it hurt me for like a month, actually. It was really terrible. But afterwards, I started telling myself,
What hurt you?
okay.
The fact that what hurt you? The fact that she reacted that way. She was like, "Are you a Anglophone?" She was surprised because you spoke
No,
English.
not Anita. I mean, my classmates in the class group.
Okay, when they
I
said you,
was,
when they called you a fraud.
yeah, like,
Okay.
because it felt like I was trying to betray them. Like everything I was trying to say was, first of all, against the Anglophone crisis. And then I felt bad that, these are people I've known for a very long time. It's like your brothers, and then
Okay.
some of them have
Excuse
to
me.
say that kind of a thing.
I'm going to interject. Do you feel like because sometimes as with the, because I think maybe I have sort of the same position as you. Sometimes as francophones, branded francophones who want to have a say in the Anglophone matter, when we have when if at all we have an opinion that is not strongly against for example the government, or
Yeah.
that is not very strong directly, they just say, "Oh, your first of all, this doesn't concern you." And
Yeah.
I think some people who also, because I know that in the Anglophone community there are people who now are called not being Anglophone enough. These are the people who are all who have
A
who don't
moderate
feel
view.
strongly, yes, who have moderate views. Directly they just push you aside. So it's a bit frustrating in the fact that you can't really say what you feel or how you feel, because you don't want, that people are going to oust you or say that you're not worthy enough to speak.
Yeah.
So yeah, I
Yeah,
think
that's the feeling I had. And after a while I was like, you know what? This goes beyond my class group. So whatever I have to say, I'm going to say it. So long as I think like it's the right thing. My reasoning could be flawed, but so long as I feel like it's the right thing to do for the crisis to end, I'm going to say it. I'm going to try to express myself in the best way possible so that people can actually read what I have to say or listen to what I have to say and then come up with counter opinions. It's not always easy on social media because sometimes, you never really know who you're talking with, and sometimes people are angry, rightfully, for certain issues, and so they just pick off a part of what you said and then they just start hammering you on it. So it takes a lot of tenacity and a lot of patience to do that. And finally, the third facet of my Anglophone story is just to come back to my family history. My grandfather was living in Tombel. He got married to a Sawa woman. I grew up in Tombel before, Pidgin. Pidgin is the first language that I spoke. Like I knew Pidgin before I could even speak English. And French, nobody really taught me French. I was just going to the hall for holidays in Douala from time to time because my mom was living in Douala and I was still with my grandmom in Tombel. And so I learned French from reading. I used to read this Mickey and Super Picsou Géant. That's how I actually learned French, just from reading these comic books. And I picked up French from there and listening to the radio as well. So that's it. But I have a whole part of my family. Chris will tell you, my cousin Paddy, every weekend he was going to Kumba. Why? Because I have a family, it's a Kongan family, part of my grandfather's, my grandfather's brother, that they migrated to Kumba. My cousins in Kumba don't even speak French at all. Apart from bonjour and comment ça va, they don't know anything.
Then,
Anything.
what you've been talking a lot about, like you focus a lot on the language, or the fact that you learned English and all of that. But then, it's like it's been spoken about. It's not just about the language.
Yeah, sure.
Did you, as someone who has you grew up in the Anglophone region, so I suppose your culture, the way you act has been kind of designed or influenced by the Anglophone culture. As did you ever have like instances where you felt like discriminated upon because you were a bit like nowhere, like you're neither a full francophone or an Anglophone? Because I remember, for example, myself, people used to call me Biafra. They used to call me Biafra when I go to when I was with my family, or even in francophone settings, they'll call me Ala Biafra or whatever. So did you? And this is not really discriminatory because it's an insult. But what I'm trying to say is, like, you work now in Yaoundé. The fact that you have this sort of background in the Northwest and Southwest, has it affected you? Are you branded Anglophone, or are you affected by it? When I ask the question, you don't necessarily have to answer, the affirmative, or look for instances where that happened. Just
no, I'm going to.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to, because I feel like it's important for us to actually bring out this part. But honestly, for me, if I go back into secondary school amongst my friends, I've never felt that discrimination. And this other way too, I've never felt it. I think it's because I know how to blend myself. And I don't blend myself intentionally. I mean, it's just naturally environments that I grew up in. I was in Tombel, going to school in Tombel the whole time, speaking pidgin, and English and everything, and just being the culture. Then I'll go to Douala and stay with my mom for holidays and stuff, and then playing with other kids in the quartier. So somewhere naturally, I just knew how to just, when I get into an environment and I realize that people are speaking French, I just blend in. I don't I don't. Let's be blank. There are a lot of mannerisms and things that Anglophones, again, the culture, like not Anglophones specifically in the North and South, but Anglophones in general just do, that is very, very different from Francophones. And so sometimes when I get into Francophone setting, there are certain things that I will not do just because it's not something that I grew up doing. It's not in my culture and my nature as an Anglophone, in quotes. But just because I'm there, I can speak French and then I can blend into a certain extent. When I'm on the English side now, I speak English and I'm blending. So I've never really such discrimination as such, except for that one time when that guy said that thing when I was in the bus, and that really, really hurt me. But I've seen it happen to many people, so many people before, so many. So yeah, and then just to conclude, my own family was affected. My auntie in Muyuka, she had to pack out of her house, basically. I mean, if anybody who has family in Moyoka, my step grandmom, she too had to move. I have an uncle who was in Tombell who had to leave Tombell with his family, with 4 kids, and just basically uproot himself from his life and just disappear. Another uncle had to leave Tombell and go to stay in Loom for a while. He just only got back to Tombell like a few months ago. So I know people, family members, close family members who have been affected directly by the crisis, and I've had to just change and just stop living how they've been living just because of the consequences of this. So as far as that goes, that's my Anglophone crisis story. But I've never really shared these stories. This is the first time I'm sharing it because I just feel like it doesn't really impact me directly. Like, I don't know how to explain it, but it's not when I talk about my uncle, it's a little bit abstract. But I know people who, their direct siblings and stuff who have actually had to see these things happen. And so I leave these people express themselves because as far as it goes, I know that I can get away with certain things just because of the fact that today, if I go to Bamenda today, I can probably get away with something more than a guy called Achu, for example, is going to get away with just because I can show my ID card, I can say, okay, you are from the West Province, I can speak in French and pretend not to even know English, and I can get away with something, which is the truth. And so knowing that, even though I have this Anglophone culture and I can speak English perfectly and I can learning perfectly, I know that somewhere with everything that's happening today in terms of the crisis and everything, I should use my own voice to push the people who are really, really heterogeneous to this, who really come from this particular area of the country, and who really have these stories and who are really directly and more affected directly than I am. So as far as it goes, that's my own story.
Thank you, Daniel. If you can just mute yourself as you're done. The next person is Bensi. So I don't know if you guys want to react first of all, if you have something to say regarding Daniel's story or
Yeah, I mean, basically what I just want to say is the whole thing, the whole Anglophone Francophone thing, it's really just a foreign construct, to be honest with you. And you can see that the fact that we have these appellations have kind of fueled the divide between ourselves as Cameroonians, between ourselves as citizens of the same country. And it's easy to see where the sentiments come from. These sentiments of division, sentiments of separation. Because from, like I mentioned, I grew up, my formative years were all done in Douala. I grew up there, and uh, you have the, like Daniel mentioned, the throwing in of derogatory terms. If they're not saying Biafra, they're saying Bamenda, with the aim of making you feel, I don't know, probably less than you are. And these things on either side, I mean, this is as kids, when people were saying these things as kids from time when we're 5 years old or 6 years old. It was already there, and we inherited this from our parents, who probably inherited this from our grandparents, because it goes again to the union that wasn't probably done properly. And because of that sorry.
no, sorry, it was
Yeah, so because of that marginalization and everything, somehow people decided to alienate themselves from each other, or somehow have some hatred. I think for me it doesn't really matter. It doesn't really matter. You guys are talking about culture, which I understand, but I think that culture is defined by time and space. I think that if a person whose parents or grandparents come from the West Province or from the Center Province, if they've lived their whole lives in Boya, for instance, or Bamenda, for instance, and the only people they've interacted with are people from that area, they've gone to those schools, they're as Anglophone as anybody else, because the culture that they're used to, the way that they interact, the way that they see the world is the same as you are. The only difference is that your name could be Ashu, and their name is Aisi.
I think maybe we'll hold on that, because I think that only can be a different conversation, because some people, it's not as simple as that. It's true. I think we have it's more complex than that. And then I feel like if we just rush into the time we have now, is too short to say, who is an Anglophone and all of that. I think that's a separate conversation. If we just talk a little bit about it, I feel some people watching now or later could be frustrated, because, like Daniel said, that name itself does a lot of things. It changes things, because like he said, if he goes to Bamenda now, there are some things he can get away with because his name ends with Gongang, So and like you also said in the beginning, that you could be in Yaoundé, you speak fluent French and all of that, but then when you pull out your ID card and then they see Ayong, it changes stuff. So I think that's a completely different conversation, and not just only centered around Anglophone or Francophone. It's just, we are aware of the cultural divide in Cameroon. The whole, my name will also will make people adjust to the way they have to interact with me in different places in Cameroon. So let's go back to, I know you were responding to Daniel's story, but let's not talk too much on that, because it's not as complete as it could, as it has to be. So yeah, I'm sorry for.
Okay, so I spent the first 6 or 7 years of my life in the Northwest. I went to some nursery school and primary school in Kumbo, and then my mom later on got a job at the University of Boya. So I completed primary school there and did high school. And prior to that, I never really, I'd go visit. I had a few cousins and some family who lived in Yaoundé or Douala, and I'd go there from time to time. But it was never really long stays. And obviously when you go there, you're with family. So it's, the conversations will always be in English, and you really don't have to deal with, I was not really exposed to the cultural divide in the same way. But the first memories that I have of actually having that, being aware of the fact that I was an Anglophone, was when I went to university. I went to University of Yaoundé. I went to Polytech, and there were many things. First of all, it was a new city. Much bigger city than Boya, and adapting to the fact that everything was now in French. And I have a very typical Northwest name, right? There's no way anybody sees my name, especially if you're an Anglophone. If you're an Anglophone, you see my name, you know exactly what village I'm from. Sometimes you can even tell like who my ancestors are or something. And so that was not really something that people, and I didn't really speak. I could say a few words here and there in French, but I didn't really speak French at the time when I moved to Yaoundé. And so part of me adapting as well was learning to speak the language, learning to adapt to, or learning to talk to Francophones. And that's where I kind of realized that there is actually a difference in culture. There's actually a difference in the way we see ourselves. There's a difference in the way we act in the world, right? And the big feeling was there was the feeling as well of being in the minority, right? Because all the documents, for example, sometimes you'll be writing an exam and you look at the French copy of the exam and the English copy of the exam, and you'll be wondering, like, I don't know if, you could paste this in some computer and they'll do a better translate job than what this person had done. The person, sometimes the words were still remaining in French. And I could remember that a lot of times people were just struggling because they just couldn't understand anything, right? They had to learn this new language. And so in some sense, you had moved within your country, but you had the impression that you've moved out of your country, actually, all right? Because it's the same kind of experience that you would have if you left Boya and you moved to China and you had to learn Chinese. Not that, Chinese is probably more difficult than French, but you'd have the same the same cultural shift where you have to learn a new language, and in some sense you have to adapt yourself in a I don't want to say crude way, but you have to, in some sense, you have to bend yourself to a different system. And so I'm not going to argue that I felt discriminated against, like maybe somebody, maybe I went to an office and then because I couldn't speak French, the person didn't treat me well. There were definitely cases where, even amongst university students, which I think I've expected that at that age when we're about 17, 18, they were old enough to be sensitive to the fact that we're all different and that you shouldn't be using words like Bamenda to insult people. But that happened to me quite a few times during the six years I was in Yaoundé. Even when I finished school and I was working, that was a big thing. And so I would not say I've never really experienced the kind of discrimination where you'd say you went into an office and then because you're an Anglophone, they treated you different from the way they'll treat a Francophone. But I'll definitely say that I became more aware of that identity, of that cultural divide, of that, of the fact that the cultures are actually different, and that where I come from.
Sorry.
Yes, can I?
You said like when you moved from the
From
southwest
Boya,
to from Boya to Yaoundé, you
Mhm.
you really saw the cultural differences. Can you give like examples, like real examples? Is it like from the way people greet, from the way people, like what?
You can see that in the way people interact with each other.
You can see it's that's something I'll probably have to think about. I have to think about what I have to say carefully. But it's not. It's the way in which people interact, right? It's like I think I'll as I talk, maybe a good example will come into my mind, and then I'll I'll tell you.
I'm asking because like for me it's quite it's difficult for me to get it because.
Can I just come quickly? And I don't even have to think. Okay, the way we dress, okay, the way we address each other, just things like politeness. If you get any taxi in the morning, if you greet people. So mind you, when you generalize, there's a danger in generalization. So it's not. I don't want anyone to jump on me and say I don't do that. It's just not about the individual. It's about the group attitude of the group culture. It's about how you dress. Okay, how you address people if you get any taxi in the morning. If you went into an office, would they ask you to have a seat, or how they'll talk to you if you're struggling? And we usually struggle because you speak in English, and that's a different problem. Some people will not speak to you if they don't speak in French. That is, I don't think it's consequential. But those simple things, how even what you want to eat, for example, which is fairly, for example, people eat. When I went to Douala, everyone has baguette in the morning. When I'm in a taxi going to the hospital, everyone in the morning has baguette. When I go back to where everyone has kumba bread. So it's about the food, it's about how you dress, it's how you speak and how you address people, and all those subtle things that they're very subtle, but if you put them together, they're very loud. Without even thinking, I could think of loads more.
Okay. As for the rest, like please think about these stories and these particular things, because it's important at the end of the day when we talk about unity. It's important to bring out these differences and make them shine, because it's particular to Anglophones, and it has to be put forward, not in the sense of like it being different. It's like, a specificity that must be also praised. Eating baguette or kumba bread in the morning is not something that should divide us, and it's important to bring out these differences, these cultural differences, and make them shine and make them, put value in them. So just as as everyone is going to talk, just think about it in the back of your mind. Memsi, want me to continue?
Yeah, and I think, Juanita, I just want to mention as well, just in passing, that these differences, that when we say there are differences, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're negative. It's just the fact that just by themselves, the interactions, the way that we dress, the way that we talk, and sometimes the way we address each other, the way we address elders is just different. And it's down to, I'm guessing it's down to I would say, different colonial heritage. I would say that. So it's not necessarily negative. It's not that one is better than the other or one is worse than the other. It's just that when you leave one part of the country to the other, it becomes more apparent. And it kind of, if you've not witnessed it before, it kind of shocks you. I could also talk about hygiene. That's one of the biggest thing that I grew up in Douala, yeah, and I would go to the southwest, and then I would go back to Douala, and then one of the first things that I would notice leaving the southwest, moving into the littoral, would be the hygiene, and not just environmental hygiene, personal hygiene as well. So there's a lot of differences that we could talk about. But I just wanted to point out that these differences are not necessarily negative ones. So we're not trying to say that one person was probably better than the other or anything.
But yeah, I think as far as my experience of what I consider my Anglophone story is, I think that's what I would say, that I spent the first 16, 17 years of my life on one area, and there was a bit of a culture shock. It took me quite a bit of time to learn the language, to get adapted to a new culture. And that's when I realized that there is actually a stark difference between both cultures. And I don't have stories of, formal discrimination, or apart from little insults here and there. I think that'll be the extent to which I would say, I was discriminated against, if I can use the word.
You worked in Yaoundé. As the job search, like, how did it go? As an Anglophone, did you? Because I know you were also a president of the Anglophone Polytechnic Association, something like that. From your own experience and that of others, when you were looking for a job, like, how was that?
I was quite fortunate in that I got a job while I was still in school. So I had done a number of internships with this company, and then they knew me, and so I had an offer from them while I was my fifth year. And so in that sense, I was quite fortunate. I didn't have to go through the traditional thing of moving from office to office, dropping your CV and attending interviews and things like that. The experience that I just described, was quite common to all the other Anglophones who came to Polytech around the same time. So when I was president of the Association of Anglophones in Polytech, what we used to do is we'll travel around the country at the time what we considered Anglophone were people who studied in the English system, right? Because they were the ones who had like a lot of difficulties adapting to the French manner of education. And so we'd go around encouraging them to come to Polytech, organizing preparatory classes for them and things like that. And so they experienced to varying degrees, right? So how easily you adapted to the culture depending on how good you were with languages, for example, how good you were at learning French. And there were a lot of people who really struggled with it, right? I saw a lot of people who struggled and then they ended up just leaving and abandoning it because the culture shock was too much. They weren't able to cope with, learning the language and just functioning in the culture and even in the French system of education. And so I saw a lot of that. And I think that most of those people were better placed to tell those stories. I can only, tell you, well, I went through the system and I survived, right? So, but other people, the system wasn't as kind to them. And they obviously have a bigger axe to grind than I do. And I think that somebody who really struggled in that sense will be in a better place to tell you what that experience was like.
Okay, thank you, BMC. The next person is Chris.
Well, I didn't work in Cameroon, so I would not be able to tell you anything regarding employment-related discrimination.
But you lived in Douala.
I lived in Douala. I'm not going to lie. See, I'm going to be very honest. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Apart from the snide comments, probably when I was a kid, throwing, Bamenda here and there. By the time I was a teenager, if I didn't tell you, you probably not know I was Anglophone or came from the Southwest province. So obviously the interactions were all done in French when I was speaking French. And I mean, even when people found out, it was just a passing thing. Oh, that guy, he's Anglophone, his parents Anglophone, that's it. I didn't experience discrimination. I didn't experience marginalization per se. But again, just as Bemsi said, just because I didn't experience these things doesn't mean it wasn't the realities of some other people. Uh, so my Anglophone story as an Anglophone living in the French speaking part was basically just that. Yes, you had the snide comments, which from the very beginning I attributed to ignorance, because you had people that would assume I was from Bamenda without even knowing that English-speaking part of Cameroon had other cities other than Bamenda. So I always attributed it down to ignorance more than anything. Yeah, and some people, when they were educated, when I explained to them, see, there's two provinces. I don't know why they didn't know there were two provinces. I explained to them, a bit of geography. They would understand. Obviously, you have the odd person, and usually odd person trying to throw insults here and there. But in general, in terms of, I did do an internship in Douala, and there was no discrimination. I didn't experience it. But again, like I mentioned, that wasn't the reality of everybody.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you, Chris. But Lawrence.
I mean, I want to make a distinction between things that are consequential, for example, or things that are inconsequential. For example, if you call me Libamindala, which is something I've heard so many times when I was in Douala, if you call me that, I don't think it's consequential. So there's prejudice and it's all right. But I really want to focus on things that are consequential, things that I feel make a difference, and the things that are throughout some of these things. I think my parents lived it. My dad, when he finished in school, had to leave from CPC Bali, not knowing one word of English or French to go to Yaoundé. And it's a culture shock that Bemsu spoke about. He faced it, I faced it. And if you want to think about it, you need to think about people that come from Akwaya and places where they've never spoken French before. They watch maybe Malabo or something. I don't watch much French TV at all. And how you would feel if you find yourself in Douala or Yaoundé. It is exactly the feeling that if you're abroad, if you're listening to this program and you're abroad, exactly the feeling that you feel when you leave from Cameroon to Paris or to America, like in a different country. And you can't know that feeling of how it feels to be in a completely different country till you leave your country. And worse still, if you go to leave your country and go to a country where you don't speak the language. So that's it. So there's a bit about consequential and inconsequential prejudices and discriminations. But I want to start by just sort of giving a rundown of mine. So when I went to medical school, you had to write an exam and everyone had to go in Francophones and Anglophones, everyone in the same pool. If you're an Anglophone, you typically had to have somewhere around sort of 16, 18 points, to get in. But if you're a Francophone, you needed to have one back, and that back would be back A or back B. So it's not a homogeneous system. That back A, I don't know what that back A comprises of, but that back A is equivalent to someone who has 25 points or has 18 points. I don't know how the system works.
You didn't take into consideration like the average of the
back
person.
No, the back is not. It's not the average. It's based on what back you have. So the back, there's a sciencey back and there's a more artsy back. I don't know what it is. But the issue is it's not homogeneous. Whatever the average system is, means that there's no way for you to equate someone who has 18 points, 25 points, because that point difference makes a difference for an Anglophone. For example, 25 points, you're almost guaranteed if you get a good interview. If you have 18 points, it's different. So, but for Francophones, there was no clear way of you distinguishing that also, and there was no equivalent. And that system where there's no equivalent is present in many, many aspects of Cameroonian life. I don't have the time to go into that. And then there was also the fact that for you to be able to go to the University of Boya, which is the only English-speaking university in all of Cameroon, you had to have an ordinary level English. It's not the same if you're a Francophone. If you're a Francophone, there was a 3 months remedial program that you could take, and that will allow you to get into the University of Boya. So understand this. I am an Anglophone. I only speak one language, unfortunately. I want to go to the only university where I am actually able to go to, and I can't go to a university if I haven't got honorary level English. But at the Francophone, can do a 3 months course, which is not regulated, and be able to get to that university that I cannot get into. So sort of get a feeling of where this kind of prejudice we're going into. And then obviously we get into medical school. And then we have all these homogeneous exams that are always trying, to bring a heterogeneous society together. And BEMC did allude to that, where the exam was translated in English, but that English was so bad that you had to read the French version of the English for you to understand. So you think about it, with 200 multiple choice questions, you could easily just fail everything. And so those are some of the things. And then when you finish from school, the better university, the better hospitals are. So we had to go to Douala, obviously, and in Douala, you have to go and do your internship in French. And this is where that culture shock comes in. And you need to do your internship or your research in French. And we were in an Anglophone school, which was so very new. So we had to find professors from Yaoundé and everywhere else. And it was just so difficult. And I would say to you, the school is now 12 years old, and it's the same thing. We do not have professors because there's no incentive for them to come there. And that incentive needs to come from the government. It cannot come from the people.
So you have French professors teaching at the medical school in Boya?
We have a few, obviously. We have a few. And those are the guys that want to get their names known. And one of the best of the bunch that I know, he's now a professor of University of Chang, and came there, made his name, and went away because there's no incentive to stay there. Why is there no incentive? Because there's no referral hospital where he can actually practice to the extent of his competence. There is none in the whole of the Northwest and the Southwest. And that's a different story. Then you finish. And for you to understand that Cameroon is not a homogeneous society. So when we were in BHS together and Juanita, I did not actually know that we're different. So I know a bit of that history. So for me, Juanita was the same like me, completely the same. Jumti, Tatiana, Oli, everyone, BMC, there was no difference. And then I came to university. It's not very apparent. And then I went to Douala. Then I started understanding that we're not the same. Now, when you finish as a doctor, I didn't practice in Cameroon for too long. When you finish as a doctor, you'll be sent to a region of your origin. So the system reverts. Yes, the system reverts. I was sent to Limbe because they didn't know that Kema was a banging name. So they thought Kema was back with him. So that is where I was sent to. Mbaman, who is from, I think he's from somewhere just from the center, was sent to Batibo because they thought he's from Batibo. So the system reverts to the regions, and we regional balance in Cameroon because it's a recognition of the fact that we're not the same, we're different, and there's some inequalities. But those inequalities are 234 because we have 234 ethnic groups, but also there's a big line that divides everyone to English and French, and our experiences are different. Now, I'm a very strong character, I would say that, I'm a bit cocky, but I try and defend myself fiercely. But in 2018, I wrote a story about the man from Campbell on my Facebook when I used to go on this rant about how Anglophones, there's a problem we need to listen to. And the man from Campbell was a chap that I saw, was a gentleman that I saw in Hôpital Général who had come from Campbell. And just to give you a bit of perspective, for you to leave from Campbell to Hôpital Général, where this chap has come to, it takes you about 14 hours because it takes about 7 hours to bad roads, 7 hours from Campbell to Mancon. From Mancon, you take another 7 hours to come to Douala and then make your way to Makepe. So 14 hours this chap had taken to come to see Professor Njok because he'd had this swelling on his face, turned out to be a cancer, which he'd had for about 3 months. And so he'd been saving up to, to come to Hôpital Général to come and see a specialist, the only person that I told could sort out his problem. And so he comes to Hôpital Général with 126,000. He comes to Hôpital Général to come and see Professor Njok. And I was the young medical student there. I was doing my internship with Professor Njok. And he comes in, and I'll say something. There's inequalities that face all Cameroonians because I've seen people in Douala suffer. I've seen someone who had kidney problems when he was 21, a problem that anyone could have. And at 36, he was still dialyzing, having to spend 10,000 every week to dialyze. He was a Francophone. So we all suffer in Cameroon. But I will tell you something about the man from Campbell, some of his experiences that were very unique. The man from Campbell came 14 hours to a place which was a country within his own country. But the reality was that it was not his country because he could not speak the language. It's very important, that language component. That man from Campbell could not speak the language. So it was of great relief when he saw me, the young medical student there, and I had to spend the rest of that morning sort of tending to him, saying to go to this place and go to this place. The first investigation that was requested was a CT scan of the face, and that was about 86,000. He came to Douala with the 126,000. It's not the poverty aspect of it. It's the fact that it's not the fact that he's poor, because everyone in Cameroon, we've got poor people everywhere. It's the fact that this man from Cambe is 14 hours from his home. Do you know why he's 14 hours from his home? Because since independence, there's no referral hospital in all of the Northwest and the Southwest where this chap can go to. And my 12-year-old medical school, which is still a young medical school, still hasn't got a teaching hospital. So when my dad died in 2016, he died in the reanimation in Bamenda General Hospital, which is not a reanimation. I'll tell you that there is one, this in Douala, in Yaoundé, that's of highest quality, about 7 there. In Sangmelima, there's one which is just a few kilometers from Yaoundé. And even in the north, where I'll tell you I run a big organization, as you may know, where the uptake of healthcare intervention is very poor, they still try and create hospitals there and sort of dialysis centers. I did my research from the north there, from Adamawa, Yaoundé, Douala, and there's so many disparities in terms of availability of healthcare service. I can tell you from that perspective because I have first-hand experience. So the man from Cambe now has to leave and travel from someone else's country, sorry to say it that way, to go back to his country. And you can feel the relief when you're in a bus or something, when you're leaving from Douala or Yaoundé and you get past the Mongo, you're going into Boya, you feel relief. Or you're going into Mankon, you feel relief. It is that feeling that I am in a country which is my country, that I don't feel belongs to me, that people cannot understand. And this is the dialogue that we need to have. And I have all sorts of stories. Now, it's not just based on my experience, but I've lived those stories for other people. My friend that we shared an apartment together in Douala went to one of these écoles de gestion in Douala. And when he went there and presented his GC advanced level, they kept asking me to provide his back, because the company, and you can't blame the company, did not know what a GC advanced level is, but actually supposed to be the equivalent of the back, but the company did not know. It is a deeply heterogeneous society, and it is heterogeneous not just on the tribal level, but on the majorly linguistic level. That's it.
I think in the questions there are a lot of people who, because your stories are quite. I like the fact that they're direct and they put it clearly. And the aspect of the language, we've been speaking about it, and it's important to put it in context with such stories, because when you talk about the man from Cambe story, you can actually understand, because if I go to China and then I want to seek help or medical, just for someone to tell me, to help me direct me where I have to go, it will be very frustrating. And like you said, it's very frustrating to be in your own country but feel like a stranger in your own country. From your story, we could get talking about traveling from Cambe to Douala, 14 hours. It's ludicrous. Talking about the fact that there are no hospitals, because we talk about it, the fact that there's no reference hospital, and everyone is like, yeah, there's no hospital. But when you think about that, when you put a story behind the problem, it weighs more. You have more. It's richer, and it's important because it makes people really understand and shakes people to know that, okay, this is actually a problem. So I guess from everything that was said, because the objective of this is to spark the conversation, and I hope after this, Ben Lawrence, you're on Twitter, so you should get back on there, because I see a lot of people asking to talk to you later. It's easy or simplistic to say, where do we go from here, because we don't hold the solution, and we don't actually grasp the whole of it. But let's try. Where do we go from here? What can we do? When I say this, it's not really about finding the end solution. Is to get to the solution, we will have to go through a lot of steps. So what is the next step? How can we, we see where we're going to, and how can we push forward? What are the things it's been 4 years, it's been many more years even, we can look back in retrospect and see what has worked and what has not worked. What can we do to move together? The good thing about the end Anglophone crisis is that we have a lot more people who are joining the conversation, who are actually willing to do something. The thing is that they don't know what to do. And that is why, like, they're turning to you guys to, okay, tell us what to do. We want to help you. We want to help ourselves, because it's not just about helping you, it's about helping, we're one. That is for still for a lot of people, we are one. And what can we do? So the floor is yours. Yeah, Daniel, you're on mute. So
what can we do? Honestly, I have a more morose view, because I feel and I think and I'm very certain that the government doesn't want to put an end to this for some reason that is unknown to us, for some reason that I can actually guess, And if I can guess the reason, it's because some people are lining their pockets with money that is supposed to, I don't know, they're basically profiting from this. I don't want to get into stories now because, sound like speculations, but very well-founded speculations, and certain things have come over and over again. So I just want to behave and go ahead as if the government doesn't want to care. The government doesn't want to solve the problem. And I feel like perhaps that's the stance that we should all have. Like these guys, because we have had opportunity after opportunity after opportunity. And I feel like it's even too late now, because we are having a situation where on the ground is basic. Well, Cameroon has turned into Liberia back in the 90s, when, Charles Taylor was, organizing his little war and his little revenge and everything happening in Liberia, and Sierra Leone and all those things and all of this war. Now we basically have warlords that are, having their little kingdoms in the north and southwest. We can call the Amber Boys or whatever name we want to. But if you take somebody like, what's his name? Field Marshal, he's basically a warlord right now. And so we need to have to learn to call a spade a spade. And so the situation has deteriorated to a degree now that if you're going to even ask, like, if we're going to negotiate, or we're going to come to a negotiating table, or we're going to have peace talks, like, you're like, with who are we going to have peace talks? And it's funny because Bobia himself brought that up in a very rhetorical way when he was announcing the Grand National Dialogue or whatever. And he said, Dialoguer mais avec qui? Then he went on now to announce a national dialogue, which is really, really ironical. But, it just really pinpoints the question on the head, that dialogue with who, or how do we go about it. But somewhere I feel optimistic, because if you look at the case of the guerrillas, the FARC guerrilla in Colombia, after that war has been the longest running conflict in the modern history, longer than even the Vietnam War. So it's over close to 40 years that the guerrilla issue has been happening in Colombia. Colombia is a far bigger country, than Cameroon is, with far bigger population. But somewhere they were able to, come to the table and resolve this thing, resolve whatever crisis. Some try to be optimistic that maybe, even despite the fact that the Amber Boys, are not even as well equipped. They don't even have the I don't know, the logistics or whatever that these FARC rebels have, because they had cocaine and they were selling cocaine. The CIA was involved and they were able to buy guns from Iran. Anybody who knows history knows of the Iran Contra issue and America, involvement in South America and all of that stuff. So they could actually fund their war for all of this while. But it's a different situation in Cameroon. But at the same time, so 4 years ago, we never knew that we could be where we are today. In any case, I'm optimistic that it might come to an end. So my solution, I feel what we should do now is try to act as if the government doesn't exist. And we citizens should come up with as many citizen initiatives as much as possible. Try to have some kind of a synergy around these different initiatives and seek solutions, and go ahead with ourselves to implement these solutions to the crisis. because perhaps that's what's going to take the government. Because we have a government that likes to hop on everything to take credit for everything. Perhaps when we start doing these things and we start having some tenable results, some tangible results, they are going to want to come and hop in and say, okay, you know what,
Then,
let's
excuse me, like, what are these things? Because you say we have to start doing things and all of that. Like, what are these, like, what are these things that we can do? Can you just say like 2 or 3 things? Like, what are the
yeah.
things that, yeah.
Okay, first of all, the conversation like this what we're having right now is one conversation, right? It's just something that, you know, this is an initiative, and we're having more and more of this. I think thank God to COVID. Well, thank God in a way to COVID-19. We have Zoom now. We have these Zoom panels and all these things that we meet together and we talk about these things. And the more we talk about these things and we bring people from different views with different realities, we can talk about all of these things and we can start seeing similarities in the different approaches that we're trying to bring together to the table. And based off of these similarities, we can have a springboard to find solutions to the problem. That's one thing. Another thing. Recently, I've learned about the Anglophone Youth Conference that was created by, I think, by Tino Foya. You know, he's trying to bring together solution. And I spoke to him, and he told me one thing, like one very simple, very simple, but very heavy. He says, for example, we're not going to wait on the government to we're not going to be asking the government every time that where is the English version of this official document. Next time when they put out the official document only in French, we are going to go ahead ourselves and translate it and push it out on social media or wherever it has to go to, so that people can actually reach it. So, you know, that's the philosophy I'm hoping on that. You know, forget about the government. Just I mean, we know they are there and we know that we can only do so much. And at some point, the government has to take the lead on this thing and it has to come from leadership. But at the same time, let's just pretend that they are not there and do whatever we want to do. And so the Anglophone Youth Conference is one of those initiatives that has been created. And I feel like more people should go. I think they have a Facebook page. Read it up. That Trin's trying to set up things, a website and all of that. But go ahead and join them and lend your voice. And, you know, let's see how we can move on and how we can see how we can try to solve this ourselves.
Okay. Thank you, Daniel. Chris?
Yeah, just basically, I'm addressing Daniel with this. I understand what you're saying, and it is commendable, you know, trying to take the initiative upon ourselves and being proactive rather than reactive, sitting down and waiting for the government. But I think we're at a level where, you know, people are dying, you know, lives are being lost, and you're saying these things, and I'm trying to build a picture in my head to see how it works. And how can we as the youth, how can we, you know, what can we do to stop these killings? Because look, I am very, very concerned about the lives of citizens. You know, lives are being lost. If it were a situation where, you know, we're just, you know, protesting or grieving against or, you know, expressing our grievances against, you know, bad governance, sorry, I could understand. But we're dealing with violent extremism as well, you know, and violent extremism that is born out of marginalization, out of complacency from the government, you know, out of years of inequality, which has been fostered by the government. So, how do we get to a place where we can? Because I'm trying to, I understand the bad governance side of things, yes, but for me, what's important for me is to try to get to a level where, you know, it's no longer the norm for us to hear about killings and, you know, arbitrary killings and things like that. How can we, what can we do as a people? You know, what can we do to get to a point where, you know, we don't have these things happening? And I think it can only work if we have a government that is willing to listen, willing to respond, and willing to act in unison with us, the people. Without that, I don't see that happening.
Yeah.
But, you know, sorry, but I could also advance the argument that, you know, the government, like I said at the beginning, government seems to be willfully not wanting to put an end to this, because right from the very onset, you know, when things were a lot more managed, like say come to discuss, come talk with the moderates, talk with these people, there was always this high-handedness of the government, and it has lasted through the crisis. And unfortunately, as we go on and we keep going on, it hasn't changed. The government still seems not to want to really come down and solve the problem like the way it's supposed to be solved. And
Excuse me, Daniel.
how?
Sorry,
Yes.
I'll interject because we don't have much time.
Okay.
But I want to say it's important to have initiatives, but you cannot put aside the role of the government. You cannot. I think maybe in the way you expressed yourself saying forget about the government. People can really interpret it as being, do not regard the government, do not ask anything of them, because they have a duty to us as citizens. So it's important to have, although we should not wait on them to do things, but we cannot say forget about them, because when you say forget about them, people can really forget about them and actually not hold them accountable for the things that they should be held accountable for. So it's important to, in the way we say things. So okay, Ben C.
I guess the question then is, how do you hold them accountable, right? Because a lot of these things, they all devolve from a strike September, October 2016, right? Which was lawyers and teachers in Bamenda were trying to hold the government accountable with respect to their, the salaries, the fact that you had people teaching in French in schools in Bamenda, and they had like a legitimate list of grievances, right? And it was that attempt to hold the government accountable which devolved over the course of many years. So the question that I'm asking then is, I understand what Daniel is saying, and even though there's a part of me which agrees with it, that there's some things which citizens can do on their own, right? You gave the example of translating things. There are many initiatives that one can do, but there is a reason why governments exist, right? And they have a role. The problem that we have is that we have a dysfunctional government that doesn't feel accountable to the people, that in some sense they feel seems like the purpose of the government is to grow itself and for people to get rich off of it, right? No, you don't have the sense that people are going to the government, getting into government because they want to serve, or that they even feel some kind of obligation to live up to those kinds of ideals that we would have. So the question then is, when we take the initiatives of our own to do things, what can we do to hold the government accountable? What I think is that many times when we think about holding the government accountable, we're thinking about ministers, we're thinking about, people in high places. And I think that we should think more on the local level, right? That I think that we can hold mayors accountable for things that are going on in their cities, right? Like Kumba should have, the urban council should have a mayor, right? Why? There are many questions that people have been asking on social media about why there was no teacher in the school at the time when the massacre was happening. But we've been waiting to hear something from the president or the prime minister. But I haven't heard anything, for example, that any statement from the mayor acknowledging some kind of responsibility from it. And I haven't, anyways, maybe I've been unaware of it, but I haven't seen any of the same drive to ask questions of those kinds of people, mayors, DOs, and people who are, in closer contact with the people that are supposed to serve. And so I would say that we should focus on the local representatives, the local people, the people who are closest to the people on the ground, and see what we can do to hold them accountable for the power that they have.
Well, MC, I feel like you're giving the government too much credit. Sorry, you're holding them to too high standard, because basically every administrator out there just has marching orders, and we all know where the marching orders come from, the central committee of the CPD, and they're like, okay, you go out there and you do this. So in terms of even asking for accountability from these people, like, why didn't you go there to talk? The president himself didn't even go to Kumba to go see the families, So it's like you're holding them too high standard for something that I'm going to do. I'm not saying that I'm not coming back to say that we should ignore the government completely. But let's not be disillusioned. Let's not feel like, let's not be I don't know, to think too much good of them, that expect something good of them. Let's
That
just assume the worst and roll on that.
Daniel, the fact that saying that we should hold them accountable and ask these things of them is not because we actually necessarily expect them to do something, because we
No,
know how they've been
I
acting.
agree.
So
No, I
I think
agree on holding them accountable. I'm 100%.
no, no,
Let's not stop. Let's keep hammering them. They have accountable for everything that is going on down there. But at the same time, we're holding them accountable. We're also kind of assuming that, you know what, they're not going to do anything. So let's see what we can do.
both go together. It's just like,
Yep.
for example, I can go back to what happened in 2018 with the at the Conseil Constitutionnel, when they had when they had all the legal fights on the election. They knew, one could assume that they knew what the outcome will be, but it's important to do these things so that, even for prosperity, even for posterity, we are just people. We are going to come and go, so it's important for people to know after that this is what happened. I remember a few months, like last year, when I was doing some research on I was reading on the women fight, Cameroonian women's role in the fight for independence, and all these things. And I actually saw, with the UPC and all of that, I actually saw on even the UN's archives, you have loads and loads of petitions from simple from people like you and me, people in those days, like who didn't have much of an education, and they had petitions. You'll see on some petitions, it's like maybe 3 lines. My husband was abducted 5 months ago, blah blah blah, and they did all of that. It's important. One, you could feel like, okay, it will not change anything and all of that, but it's important to do these things, to have these acts. You write up to your mayor, and because he has a duty, no matter how they want to put it or whatever, they have a duty. So it's important to actually use these legal tools that we have. It's important to put them in front of their acts and say, okay, I'm going to do that, so that they don't say, oh, did you complain? Because you didn't complain if you had done this. So with such governance, you have to do everything to secure yourself. So if there's that you can do, you do that. You do the things that you can do individually. You do this, you do that, so that everywhere you put them in front of their acts and say, okay, I did this, I did this, I did this. You didn't react. So that's what I want to say about that. Bensi, you were just reacting on what the others said, and you were talking about, how can we hold them accountable? On back to the question of, where do we go from here? Apart from that, like, do you have something to say?
No, I think I share a lot of Daniel's sentiment, right? I think that's what we actually started talking about, that there's a sense in which, conversation is good. There's a lot of initiative that's going on, whether it is helping the people who have been internally displaced or whatever. But ultimately, the problems that we face are structural problems. The problems that we face are problems that government has to solve, right? These are problems that when Lauren spoke about, the unavailability of hospitals in Northwest and the Southwest regions. Christian also spoke about the real problem of security. Really, those are not problems that citizens can solve, right? I mean, unless you have like extremely wealthy citizens who come down and start building hospitals and providing police forces for the entire place. Those are problems that only the state can solve. Only the state has the resources to solve. And so there's a part of me which is a bit pessimistic, which really is not clear about that dimension of the problem, right? The dimension of the problem which is structural and which cannot be handled by just citizens' actions. And I honestly do not have any solutions for that, because if you're talking to if you're talking to somebody who is not listening to you and who has, I would say, almost absolute power over you, right? Almost absolute power over you. There's not much room. Where do you go from there? Do you know, like if you're talking to somebody who is listening to you and who feels a certain sense of obligation to serve you, then you can make headway, right? You can table your concerns. But it feels in some ways like you're talking to somebody who is not. When I say somebody here, I mean a group of people, obviously. And so I'm not really quite clear about what we can do to solve the institutional, the structural dimension of the problem.
Right.
Okay, so Christian, I don't know if you said something already concerning, what we can do, how to go forward, the things we need to address. In when I say where do we go from here, it's also, it's not necessarily you coming up with a solution. It's just like you just spoke about internally displaced. I could say, in how to go forward, you can just remind everyone and say, okay, we talk a lot about these things on, the long-term stuff. Right now, you have internally displaced people in the bushes, in Yaoundé and Douala. And from your stories, you have people who now were forced into the Francophone region. So first of all, they left their own houses in in total shock without being prepared. And then they just get pushed into a zone where they don't know anything. They are confused. They're like in a different country. So just saying that, okay, it's important to think about that. And even for, because there are a lot of initiatives, I see a lot of people, gathering up aid and to bring to these people. It's important to remind them, okay, I know you're trying to do something good. Remember that, it's true, food and clothing is important, but think about the fact that these people are in a place they don't know. They're totally confused. So let's look back let's think about these short-term things, and also the fact that we talk about conversation. It's good, we have Zoom and all of this, but mostly these Zooms are for mostly people who are out of the country, and for those who are in the country but who are privileged. So it's important also in this conversation to remember that, the bulk of the population is on the road, on the streets. It's important to also think about ways to talk to these people and to send to make them, to inform them on what is going on, and also tell them what they can do. Because at the end of the day, power is power for the people, by the people. The people hold the power. It's important to make that known to them. So yeah, I'll leave Chris talk.
I mean, I hear what you're saying, and a lot of what we're saying is almost utopic. I admire the optimism. To be honest with you, it's quite refreshing. But I share Bemsi's pessimism, because the thing is that I feel like we are, and even here, I feel like we are still downplaying the problems that we are facing. Cameroon is not my first. Actually, I've not experienced war in Cameroon because I've been out of the country, and even when I visited, I didn't experience anything. I didn't experience conflict, but I've been in a war-torn zone. I've worked in a war-torn zone. I was in the Congo, and I witnessed killings. I witnessed victims of rape and things like that. And it's not. I mean, it's not something that we should be taking lightly. And I understand what we can do as citizens, as the citizenry, we can play our part. But I feel like the two parties that are actually doing the fighting, yeah, I know that there are a lot of Cameroonians, a lot of Southern Cameroonians, if we should use the term, who probably are for restoration of the former Southern Cameroons, but are not keen on armed conflict. So I'm not talking about them. I'm talking about the people actively, doing the fighting. I feel like we need to get to a point where we can get these guys and probably get some guys from the government to probably have a proper debate about this. Because yes, we can help internal displaced people, but what happens? We're still going to get them coming in to the francophone zone. What's going to happen? We just keep housing them, keep housing them. I'm talking about solutions that lead to these things not happening in the first place. You know, reverting back to what we were before the conflict. That's what I'm looking towards. I'm not looking at dealing with the consequences of the armed conflict. I'm trying for us to, first of all, the first thing that government has to do is to acknowledge the problem, which doesn't really feel like they've done so far. You know, they've acknowledged the existence of conflict, but they've never really acknowledged the existence of the root cause of it. You know, and I think that's the big problem, because for those people who still rely on government sources for their information, they don't think there's a problem. They think the Anglophone crisis, I'm losing my mind. They think the Anglophone crisis is probably just, you know, a bunch of people throwing tantrums. And that's why you hear things like, oh, there's marginalization in the South province or southern region. The people of the North, you know, don't have infrastructural development as well. Why are the Anglophones the only ones talking? Because the problem is not really spoken about, the root cause of it. And if it's not acknowledged, then I feel like we're not going anywhere. Yes, we're going to keep helping internally displaced people. We're going to keep talking about peace, hashtags online. But if we don't really address the root cause and how we can go about it, I feel like we're just spinning around in the same place.
Okay, thank you, Chris. You, Daniel, but be brief, please.
Yes,
Then
I just want to say, whatever we do now, we have to be very strategic. Because if you look at it go back to the beginning, one of the sins of the consortium was that, you know, and you cannot blame them. They were very enthusiastic about what they wanted to do. They had the legitimate reason and the legitimate, and, you know, they wanted to get things done. But as far as strategy goes and thinking ahead goes, they probably didn't really think about it. And one of the things was like the ghost town, because at some point now people are complaining that, you know, it's not, especially when they have this like towns, it's very difficult for people living in Bamenda. So whatever we do now, we have to really be strategic, and we have to know the end game, and we have to move around like we're playing chess, and know that we're moving this piece across the board to achieve this reason, and we need to sacrifice this or this thing in order to be able to win whatever we want. So we have to really be strategic about how we are going about the resolving the crisis now.
Okay,
So
thank you.
it.
So we've been talking for almost 2.5 hours. So Ben will be the last, will close. And like I said, you know, it's a conversation starter. Most of you, all of you except Bemsi are on Twitter. So just on
I'm on Twitter, I'm just not active. But I think I'll probably get active in the days.
Okay, so in the chat you can give everyone your Twitter handle so that we can continue the conversation with the hashtag My Anglophone Crisis Story and, you know, End Anglophone Crisis. So yeah, Ben Lawrence.
Just before, can I just speak on something Chris said before I round up, Chris? You're talking about, you feel like the ghost town wasn't a good strategy. So I want us to be, rather than being idealistic, we have to be realistic about what we expect of something like a consortium, which is it's a makeshift institution, very quick, the people are not paid. We have to be realistic about what we expect from them. I think that's really important. This is something that I'm learning to do myself. Sometimes when you expect something from people, you want to be realistic. You don't want to be idealistic. We know that things are supposed to be done in a certain kind of way. It goes down into the strategy. You need to sit down, think about it, and see how they can implement it. But those people were never legitimate, elected people. It was a constitution that was put together very quickly, and you have to be realistic about what you expect to come from them. Having said that, I want to, in terms of what we can do moving forward, I have a few things that I'm just going to ramble over. The very first thing I want to say is that you have to recognize the magnitude of the problem that we're dealing with. In your personal lives, when you try to engage things, some of them take years and years and years to accomplish. It's not always a quick fix solution. And even as people are dying and creates an imperative for us to try and act, we still need to be, we need to recognize the fact that it is a very complex problem and it's not just going to be fixed overnight. And there's a lot of things that are going to be very tardy and are going to take time, laborious, very, very painstaking, and so very, very draining. So my first word will be just hanging there. It's going to be really, really rough ride. And the people that have been on this journey would tell you that it's very exhausting. And despair is a very familiar word with me. Um, Pessimism is a justified emotion, but we cannot afford to be pessimistic. I would say that to you with all sincerity. So it's a complex problem. It will take time. But what are the problems? I think we can divide the problems into two. We can divide the problems into what is a common problem that affects all Cameroonians and how we can address them. Okay. And the problem that affects all Cameroonians is related to governance. So every Cameroonian faces poverty, we faces sort of institutional problems that affect the individual, regardless of whether you're Anglophone or Francophone. Um, what can we do about it? I think most of the solutions are common, but from my point of view, the individual is very strong. If we started a movement, I want to say something to you. We've got a president that's been in power for 38 years. And I mean, if that president was an effective leader that brought about peace, stability, equality, and all those good values, I would have supported him. As you probably can tell, I have my strong feelings about the current government in place, and I'm very critical of them. Not because I hate anyone there, I don't actually know anyone there, but because I feel like they've impoverished our people, everyone, every single Cameroonian. But what have we seen happen recently? I think the last election, I was so vocal. I was everywhere, campaigning for whatever I was campaigning for. I thought, when this person wins, probably can listen to Anglophones, probably can change the whole country. And he lost. And there was a very shameful display of democracy that I saw that was supported by us, the Cameroonians. So when we try and relieve Cameroonians of the responsibility that the individual face, I'm quite shocked, honestly. I feel like you cannot step back from the fact that there was a shameful display of democracy that was supported by a lot of Cameroonians. So who is more powerful? Is it the government or the individual? I feel like that government is enabled by the individual. The individual is the enforcer. So ultimately, in a democracy, the power does not lie with the government, it lies with the people, even in a broken democracy. So in regards to the problems that affect Cameroonians, do we not see the problems? Are we not cognizant of the problems that affect each and every Cameroonian from the north to the south, west, and east? Okay, when the whole Anglophone crisis started in 2016, one of my expectations, and the reason why I was so disappointed, was because I felt that this was an opportunity for us to come together as a nation and try to tackle the problems that affect each other. It's true that it was an Anglophone problem, but for me, I thought that the Anglophone problem could spark a national problem, like a national revolution or a recognition of the problems that all of us face. It did not happen. The individuals have to be blamed. The people that sat down and did not act, and even subsequent to that, did not act. And also there was sort of an underlying kind of tone, or people saying, oh, well, this is an Anglophone problem. If you presented it as a Cameroonian problem, I would have supported you, but I'm not going to support you. It's not from everyone, but this is sort of the dialogues that were coming out. So we need to recognize the individual. The other thing is that what sort of language of dialogue should we be having? Now, I see people have very strong emotions, and you can probably tell I have very strong emotions as well. But I feel that in every dialogue, we need to listen and speak. And what do we need to listen and speak to? There are four groups of people that we need to speak to at every point in time. The first group of people are what I call the unionists. Those are people that see the value in a united country, strong Cameroon, everyone together. A country where we harness the resources from the north, the south, the east, and we bring it together and try to build a strong country. Those people have an argument for why we should be together. But it's very easy for those people to forget about the argument of the rest of the cohort, which are the federalists, the people like me that believe that power can only speak to power. That for you to ever address the Anglophone problem, you need to have a power that represents the Anglophone, that speaks to the other side of the power. Those people have to be recognized. And then the separatists, those are people who, like a lot of people that I know, were once very staunch unionists and have come to a point where they feel that there's no retreat from this point, that there's nothing that they can do. And they've tried to engage their brothers, they've tried to have a conversation, but they could not. So they feel like the only way for them to safeguard their future and the future of their children is to completely succeed. That is a valid voice. And there's a fourth voice, it's called the voice of the vengeful. The voice of the vengeful are people that I've met in many conversations. They do not have any sort of opinion, or they don't think about anything. They don't think about the strength of the country. They don't think about the voice of the order. They don't think about anything. If they want union, they just want the union. If they want separation, they just want separation, and they haven't got any arguments. We need to listen to all those four voices, and we need to, like in every conversation, you need to ask yourself, what voice am I speaking to? Is it the voice of someone that has valid points about why we should be in union, valid points about why you should be in a federation, valid points about separation? Or is it someone that actually doesn't just care about anything, but doesn't just like francophones or anglophones and just wants the country to break apart? So we need to listen to those voices. That's it. So the individual, I've highlighted the individual, I've also highlighted about how we go about this debate. So that's about what our common problems. The next problem is about the crisis, which, I mean, we've already spoken about it. And Chris did a brilliant job about talking about looking at the root cause. This crisis will only exist, will definitely exist in phases. So some of you folks may not know that what has happened is that this crisis, as we see today, it's probably a lot worse, and it's a lot more publicized because of the internet and everything. But in many, many years past, we've had different phases of this crisis heated, but completely oblivious to some people. So this crisis is just going to continue happening because I have seen people with convictions about what they fight for. People who have lost families, whose families have died. You can never tell them, drop your Anglophone identity and let's live as one, and for them to do that easily. That is not going to happen. But how may it happen? It may happen by, educating the people who are in different quarters and trying to bring across your point. This is the value of the individual again. Education. I feel like this is something that we can easily do, and I tried to do it for years and years and years, talking to people, educating people, just leaving the information out there, and just that information should be there, someone to come across it. I am not very fluent in French, but one of the reasons why I learned how to speak in French was so that I can engage people. And Jonita can tell you, she sees me speaking on Twitter in French these days. My French is very broken, not very great. But I try and speak in French these days. I try and write in French in Twitter and other media so I can engage people. That is a responsibility. That's something that we can do. Education is a must, and it's an imperative for everyone. That's the only way that we can address these problems. We can empathize with people. Once you start empathizing with them, saying to you, oh, folks, your dad has died, your brother has died, your child has died, I feel your pain. We can begin to quieten some of the hurt that comes from something like this. And then finally, I think, we can build institutions, starting from the individual. We can build institutions, or whether or not. I was in Cameroon very recently. I was in Cameroon in February. And what I did was I saw how rotten the country has become, really. And what I did at every juncture when I was leaving from Douala to Boya, where I live, I was adamant not to do the things that everyone would do. Pay the 500, pay the 1,000. Sometimes, do not be stupid. You have to do those things because you have to survive. But you can recognize moments where you can contribute in your own little way to make a better system. We can demand of our government, even a broken government. The government is essentially the people. We can start to build systems that are strong, find people that are credible to put them in government. The next mayoral elections, as BMC said, the next parliamentary elections, the next presidential elections, we can mobilize the right people, support them, send petitions, do all those things. I do not feel any degree of pessimism. I only feel the weight of the burden of what we have to do. I feel it's heavy, but I feel it's very, very doable. It may be that none of us sat here today is actually going to reap the benefits of the things that we attempt to do because of the enormity and the time that it needs to accomplish them. But I sincerely believe that if it's not for us, but our children, our children's children, we can begin the journey of 1,000 miles to build a Cameroon that is better. The imperative is so massive, as I said, but we need to be patient, and we need to act, and we need to act now. That's it for me.
And but yes, we can.
Thank you, Ben. Thank you, Ben Lawrence. Thank you, everyone. I think, let me see if we have questions. You guys have been looking at the chat. I choose to be optimistic. There's so many reasons for me to be a pessimist about all of this, to look at all the dire sort of outcomes, but I choose to be optimistic because what other choice do I have? If I want this to end, I can only be optimistic. And that is why I really am adamant about our action. It's important for us to do things. There are things that we can do, there are things that we can change, and there are things that we cannot. So let us do something with what we can. Let's do what we can. And then for the things we are not able to do, let's find ways to do them, because those things can be done. If there's no solution, then there's no problem. So if there's a problem, there definitely is a solution, and it's to us to bring it's you know, it's left to us to find those solutions. And like Ben Lawrence said, we have it all comes down to us. We are the ones who give power to whoever we elect, or whoever, even if it's not, you know, real or democratic elections or whatever. They need us, because if they didn't need us, you know, all of what is happening now wouldn't have been happening. We are important, and I think it's important to empower ourselves, to empower Cameroonians. The you know, the man riding on the bike, the woman selling oranges, she matters, because each and everyone, that is how you see countries. When you look at the history of this great nation, it all came down to individuals, and it's important to give back that power to Cameroonian. And that's what I like about, you know, it could be called the internet age or whatever. People have more access to information. A lot of people didn't know, a lot of people didn't care. A lot of people now are caring more. So it's important to bring that information to them. Like I said, like, you know, it may be like, you know, you're saying the same thing over and over. And I know when Lawrence talks about, you know, him talking about it before, you know, you were kind of like in French, they call précurseur. You were way ahead of your time, you know, when it comes to this. People were interested, but not that many. So I just want to encourage each and every one of us to keep talking, even if it's one person. That one person will do something, and, you know, it all, let's do what we can do. So thank you guys for coming. Thank you for, you know, speaking out, because just this, for a lot of people, is difficult. I remember if you guys remember, when I contacted a lot of you guys, especially those in Cameroon, I was like, don't worry, it's not going to be political, because people, you know, when they think about their face coming up somewhere, they'll be like, oh, they'll flag me, I'll not be able to travel anymore, and all of that. So even something as little as this, even for myself, to, you know, to put myself out there and show people that, you know, don't be scared. You know, you have to dare to do these things. And when you break, it may be absurd to you because you live in a country that is democratic, but then, you know, for the people there, it's a big deal. So you need to do this for them. You know, do what you can, and then, you know, we'll see how it goes. And we're not selfish about it, because we know that, you know, all of what we are doing is not, the change is not going to come like this. It will be for our children or our children's children. So it's important for us to have that mindset, and, you know, to do it anyway. So I'm going to have this conversation again. Like, I'm going to get other people to talk, you know, because it's important to have a diverse sort of panel. For next week, I'm going to, normally I have someone who Ben Lawrence and Bemsi know, you know him, Yongabi Derrick. So he's going to be with us normally next week. I'm going to get some other people. So obviously I can only work with my network, so people that I know. So to the people listening, if you're interested in taking part in this type of conversation, feel free to send me a message on Twitter. I put my handle there. And people are talking about the talk being in English and French. I feel like it's important for French speaking people to also put in an effort to listen to what we say in English. So yeah, so that's why it was in English. And I will stop talking and allow you guys to say goodbye to the people who are attending. And once again, thank you very much.
Oh, thank you very much for putting this together, Jonita. I had a really great time, and it's been a pleasure meeting Christian. And well, I'm a big fan of Daniel's work. I've been seeing Daniel's work a lot on LinkedIn, his marketing articles. So I've been a big fan of yours for a while, but this is the first time I'm, you know, actually having the time to meet you. So thank you very much. And I've learned a lot as well. I think Ben Lawrence is probably the most optimistic amongst us, and I think hopefully some of that optimism trickles down to me in the next, you know, in the days coming.
Who's next, Christian?
Yeah, Christian.
We're taking turns. Juanita, just like I told you, this was a very commendable idea. Thanks for putting this together. It was nice meeting Ben Lawrence and Bemsi. I did learn a lot. Just as I said, one of the one of the biggest reasons why I wanted to take part was just to understand and see things from another perspective. And I am enthused by Ben Lawrence's optimism, and I especially liked his closing arguments with the discussions with the 4 different categories of people. I think it's a work in progress. Look, I'm not entirely pessimistic, but I have seen what conflict can become, and I feel like I still even suffer from some post-traumatic stress disorder, and I feel like it's going to take a long time for us to heal the nation, because a lot of us talk about the conflict but have not experienced it, so we don't really understand the impact it has on the people that live it. The people that have been internally displaced, the people that are committing the murders themselves. We may look at them and feel that they're oblivious to these things, but trust me, when the conflict ends, or if it ever does end, we would have to talk about what to do with these people, because it's not easy taking a gun from someone who's had it for so long. But I look forward to us trying to sort this out. And yeah, thanks once again.
Yeah, Daniel.
Yeah, thank you, Juanita. I'm going to pronounce it the Spanish way.
Everyone
Juanita.
has his version.
For putting this together. It was really good. And it's funny because Chris and I, we used to meet a lot in DeFi, but since we interacted on Twitter, this is the first time we're actually having like a conversation face to face, or even just hearing our voices. So it was good to reconnect with Chris and just to meet Ben Lawrence and BMC as well. And I think such initiatives are commendable, and we should be able to have more and more of these open and honest conversations, because the more we have these conversations, the more we are able to understand everybody's point of view, and the better we're able to come together to be able to resolve whatever crisis, whatever issue that we have as a nation, as a people, as a tribe, as an ethnic group even. So hopefully next time we could have somebody in Bamenda, for example, somebody who is actually in Bamenda, who wakes up every day to the sound of the gunshots, and perhaps they'll have a completely different thing to point of view to say. But I think as more and more we go on the issue, we should try to, and I'm sure you're going to bring in more and more people who are affected by the crisis in many different ways, such that we can have better opinions and more diverse opinions from everybody. So thank you, and hopefully I'll be here again. Yeah, I look forward to being here again.
Okay. But Lawrence, you already said bye to everyone now. You want to say bye again?
Bye. Bye.
Bye. Have a great end of weekend.
Sure.
All right, guys.
All right.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Nice to meet you guys. Nice to meet you, Chris and Daniel. Nice to meet you.
Yeah.
And everyone in the panel. Okay. Everyone, nice to meet you.
Okay.
Nelson,
I'm shutting everything for everyone now. Bye. Talk to you guys on Twitter.
Bye.